We do have a help desk, so password resets you can always do manually. So all you need to do when you log in, just like any other website, you could click on lost password and it'll actually walk you through the process. I'll also introduce you guys to the help desk to kind of start off with, and we have a little bit of admin stuff. So normally the way that our classes work is the first class, we do have some admin stuff. We're going to talk about where you're supposed to find the quizzes and the test, and we will cover aerodynamics in the second half of class today. And then once we kind of move forward with our lesson, starting really on lesson 2, we don't really have that much to talk about at the beginning, maybe some course announcements, and then we really kind of jump into the material fairly quickly from this point forward. Okay, we'll also talk about recommended materials as well as we progress. So just kind of stick with it, and we'll kind of make our way through everything today. All right, so here is the agenda for today. As I said before, our classes are taught live, and we do have multiple classes going on in the sense that we do have our East Coast class, and right after this class actually ends today, I have to jump into our West Coast class a little bit later and teach that. Keep in mind that each class progresses at a different rate. They are live, so I may jumble a word here or there, and it might be slightly different. But I think the most important thing is stick with the cohort that you're starting with, because this class, we may get through this entire list today, but for example, when I'm teaching a little bit later tonight for the West Coast class, we may only get to ground effect or wingtip vortices. So the start and stops are not necessarily going to align. Anytime that we don't get through the entire list of material, then just keep in mind that we will basically pick up where we left off in that class, whatever that next class period is. So for us, that's actually going to be Tuesday at 2 p.m. Pacific, which is 5 p.m. East Coast time. So what we're going to do today is we'll talk a little bit about us just real quickly. I'll introduce myself again here in a minute. We'll talk about how this course is actually designed and works. We'll talk about the private pilot license requirements, what you can and can't do, just the general idea of it. We'll also get into the medical requirements since everybody wants to know about that. Then what we'll do is we're actually going to switch gears and get into aerodynamics. So we're going to talk about the different components and getting to know your aircraft. We'll also primarily spend a lot of time talking about how the actual airplane flies. We usually like to say the wing is the thing. It's the shape of that airfoil and the design that allows us to basically lift off the ground. We'll talk about the 4 forces: lift, weight, thrust, drag. We'll also get into ground effect, wingtip vortices, wake, turbulence, avoidance, and that should say a T right there, but it's left turning tendencies. Once again, we probably won't make our way all the way down through the list. There is a quiz that is recommended. It's not required after every single class. What I will tell you in advance is that if we don't get through all the material, you can give it a college try, because we'll probably get through 80% of it. But if you want to hold off on the quiz until we actually wrap up the last little bit that we may have ran out of time for, you're more than welcome to do that as well. All right, so I think that is about everything that I wanted to cover. The last thing, too, that I'll also say is I threw the baby shark in there because I saw on the news the other day, YouTube had, I guess this video, the baby shark video, for those that have kids out there, hit 10 billion views. So this is the most viewed video on YouTube at the moment. Besides that, as you guys are basically watching these live streams, whether you're on our website, on YouTube, or Facebook, keep in mind that a lot of times the connection is based upon your internet speed. So if you potentially live in a more rural area where the internet's a bit slower, sometimes when we're showing graphs or charts on the screen, it may actually become pixelated. The way that you can kind of get around that is these systems are designed to always be in an automatic mode. So it's really dependent upon your internet, and it will basically adjust the broadcast quality that you're basically picking up. Now, we broadcast out of 1080, which is HD. Very simply, on pretty much every single device, if you go to a little gearbox, and they're all slightly different, but if you go to the gearbox, there's going to be something usually that lists quality. It usually will default to the auto mode. Keep in mind that probably the 2 best versions are going to be the 720 or the 1080p. Basically, the bigger the number, the sharper the image is going to be. So if you can select those, if you're having any problems, that usually clarifies or basically fixes the issue moving forward. All right, so let's talk a little bit about who we are, who I am. Once again, my name is David. I'm going to be your instructor over the next 12 lessons here. I actually started flying in 2001, so not a great year to get started. Put it on hiatus for quite some time, and then finished up all the rest of my licenses back in 2017. Was an instructor and actually taught these ground schools for, I would say, about 12 or 13 in-person ground schools for basically private and instrument students, and used to do that quite a bit in person. So eventually, about 2 years ago, roughly when the pandemic started, we actually ended up going to a more digital format, as you guys see right now. So I think I've taught, I would say, 30 plus classes between our courses, that is, between private, instrument, drone, CFI, CFII, pretty much the gamut of what we do. Prior to that, after I was instructing for quite some time, between 2018 or 19, ended up working for the airlines. So flew for an airline called Compass Airlines out of Los Angeles. So I was LA based, got to fly the Embraer 175 all across the country and Mexico and Canada. So I had a lot of fun there. Unfortunately, Compass, which we flew for in partnership with Delta and American Airlines, Compass Airlines actually went out of business. They were the first ones to go out of business as soon as the pandemic started. So kind of switched gears, but I do really enjoy teaching as a whole. Check Ride Prep has been around since 2017. This was actually our old broadcast. This was a couple years ago. It is much different now. If I look around me, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 screens that I'm looking at, depending on chats, internal chats and the external chats and the PowerPoints and the broadcast stuff. So it's definitely grown since then. And we don't do anything in person anymore. All of our stuff is really digital ground schools, and really what we're known for is obviously teaching live. There's not really any other program out there that teaches entire courses live, where you can get the interactivity, basically this interactive experience, which a lot of people do prefer. So that's a little bit about us. You are in good hands. We've had over 100,000 students, I believe, to date. Don't quote me on that. It's either 90 or 100,000 students that have taken these classes. And they've actually finished. So 95% of those folks have actually completed the entire course and received their FAA endorsement from us, and 99% will go on to actually take the FAA knowledge test, or what we call the written exam, and pass on the first attempt. Okay, so everything is going to be provided for you. There are some recommended materials that you can purchase outside. And there are going to be a few things you're going to need on the 4th week of class when we get to flight planning as well. But I'll go over that here in just a few. Now, as I said before, there are a total of 12 lessons that make up our course. They are approximately 3 to 3.5 hours. So we will cover about 42 hours of live classes, including the Q&As there. Now, the class materials for each lesson become available the day that the class starts. So, for example, today's lessons all became available to you at 12:01 a.m., but you'll notice that if you attempt to click on lesson 2, 3, 4, or anything else beyond that, it is locked out. I'll go through what that actually looks like here in a minute. The course overall is really to help you get through the FAA written knowledge test. We do not teach to the test. The way the material was designed is we want you to be not necessarily rote memorization, but we want you to have a better, conceptual idea. And the end goal here is to really kind of, get you to understand the material fully and become really safe, proficient pilots at the end of the day. Once the classes are finished, once again, if you missed that, all of these are recorded. So we typically will post them on our mobile app and also the Check Ride Prep learning portal that most of you are on right now. Give us about 2 to 3 hours. It does take a little bit of time to get those offline and basically put them in their correct locations. But exactly where you're watching right now is where you will see the recordings in the near future. Now, keep in mind, these are basically this is not a watered down course. So this is the same material that we would teach if you were in any of the in-person private pilot ground schools. We don't hold anything back. We don't, this is not like Private Pilot Lite versus Private Pilot. You don't get like the first 10 hours and then, that's it. You do have the entire course at your disposal. For those that are not believers, because I know the internet is a tricky place, hopefully we can make you believers by the end of the 12th lesson here. Okay, you will have to put in some work though. So a lot of people are eating dinner in front of their computers, taking a lot of notes. I've seen students take over 100 pages of notes in these classes, and it is going to be some work on your end in order to kind of keep up with everything. But it is perfectly doable. So plenty of people are able to do this at all the time. Now we are going to be teaching you a lot of new material. So, there's going to be a lot of things that are definitely going to be probably, things that don't really relate to anything that you've done in the past. We're going to be teaching you different types of aviation maps, how to read airspace, because we're now in a three-dimensional environment. We will also be teaching you how to read the flight instruments, different types of federal aviation regulations. We'll be looking at flight planning, navigation, and all sorts of other things. So I have been in your shoes. I honestly cannot remember. The best thing that I can kind of tell you is this is how you will probably look this is what I imagine you guys all look like as we're basically working through some of these subjects. Now, the way that this course is designed, keep in mind, is that the topics build upon each other. So we might do an introduction to a topic in lesson 1, and I promise you that that's not the last time that you're going to hear about that topic. We will start to kind of bring these topics together and really try to develop scenarios so you guys have a better understanding of it. I'm not a computer guy, but I took a computer science class on, what the hell was it? Sorry. Not Python, JavaScript. And this is honestly how I looked. You have all these teenagers in the class breezing past me, getting through all sorts of, I guess they call them iterations and different types of coding things. And I was just completely lost. So what I would encourage you to do is stick with it. If you can, create a study group. We also have our Facebook group. I think there's now 17,000 or just shy of 17,000 students on there. And also our website to connect with other students and see if you guys can set something up. All right, moving on to our website. So our website is kind of in a we're basically updating it a little bit. This is the latest update that you see here that Travis basically put in. This is what it looks like when you're not logged in. So very simply, if you haven't signed up, just hit the blue button. If you have signed up, all you need to do is hit the sign in button, and that will take you, once you're actually logged into the site, to something that looks like this. Now I have my profile picture there. And this is basically your member dashboard. So just kind of a few things to point out here. The main things that you're probably going to be taking a look at are anything within this bar. In order to get to the courses that you're currently at, there's really two ways. You can click the courses button, or at any point in time, if you're lost, you can basically click the online courses, and that will take you to the private pilot courses and all of our other courses that we offer as well. The other one that will become very, very helpful to you is going to be the Ask a CFI. If you have any aviation related question that we were unable to answer, maybe we ran out of time, or you were reading and you just don't understand something, you can basically click that button and post it in the discussion forum. You can also see we've answered hundreds of others from other students, so maybe the question may have already been asked and answered, so you can take a look at that. A lot of times we check these 2 or 3 times a day from our staff, and when I'm responding to them, I will typically, try to throw in some type of video or explanation or drawing or something that's supplemental that make it a little bit, make more sense in that case. Ask a CFI is really just for aviation related questions. It's not for technical issues, password lockouts, or really anything else. So just keep that in mind. I do start to move those over. If you ever need to get back to this page and you're on any other page, just click our logo, and pretty much in any page that you're on, if you click our Check Ride Prep logo, it will swing you back to this main page. The next thing we're going to do is, if you were to basically continue scrolling down, there's a couple important things I'll point out on that home page. So if you were to basically continue going down page 1, you'll then basically end up over here. You can see a list of all of the discussion forums for Ask a CFI that are currently open. We do also have our news feed, and a lot of times before classes and after classes, I would encourage you, if you have just general questions, comments, anything else, you want to update us, you can post stuff in that activity feed, on the news feed, that is. A lot of times I will post supplemental videos, things that might help you out, clarification, these types of things, third-party videos in there as well. The other thing, probably the most important thing on the bottom right at the very bottom of that page, is basically a 12 or 15 minute video. I forget how long it is. This is the, what do I want to call it? The website tutorial. So everything that I'm talking about right now, if you completely forget everything, you can basically just go to the home page, scroll down to the bottom right, click on it, and there are different chapters in there. So I basically take you through it in real time, and you can follow it click by click. So in the event you need to basically navigate or forget anything within this admin section that we're covering. Once you are logged in, we actually have 2 different menus. They basically do the same thing. They're just in different locations. The one on the left-hand side is a flyout menu. There's 3 little bars. If you click it, the menu will actually expand on the left-hand side, and then you can actually see that there are some sub-menus in there as well. The other one, and the most common one that people use, is underneath your username or name. If you click on it, you will then see a drop-down menu. And very simply, if you were to basically hover over pretty much any of these, what is this, profile, accounts, events, courses, order history, or anything else, there's going to be sub-menus located within there, so I'd encourage you to kind of poke around. Now, going back to getting to our courses, no matter what, all you need to do is click on online courses, and that will take you to our free courses. Are always listed at our top. Our lifetime members have all the premium courses at the bottom. Very simply, all you got to do is click the free private pilot ground school GS10, and that will then take you to the appropriate lesson. Once you're actually within the ground school 10, this is what you should see. Now, obviously, this is going to be what you guys are currently watching right now because this is live. But usually leading up to it, you'll see a picture of an airplane, and sometimes you'll see a time. The time may or may not be the exact same time as your, as the start time of the class. Keep in mind that the video system is based upon your computer time. So if you're in the other, another side of the world, even though we start at 5 p.m. East Coast time, mine in LA is going to say 2 p.m. So just keep that in mind. And we traditionally start the countdown about 20 minutes before class, so you can get here early, test your speakers, make sure that everything is working. On the left-hand side of the screen, these are basically all of your lessons. This is in reverse order. Sorry about that, but it will basically start off with week 1. It will have the 3 classes for this week 2, etc. A couple other things you can point out. I can point out to you if you need dark mode basically turns the screen from a white color to a darker color, kind of save your eyes a little bit, especially in the evenings. You can click that button. And if you want to kind of minimize and get rid of all the clutter, there is these kind of arrows that expand outwards. The other thing too is obviously the chat sits to the left, and you have a take a notes function. With all of our lessons, you can actually take notes just like in a word processor like app. It does save it to your profile. We can't see your notes. Other students can't see your notes. And you can access your notes by going to your profiles, and then within your profiles, there's a section called Documents. And within Documents, there is one called Course Notes, so that is where they all live. You also have the ability to download them in a Word document or a PDF and save them offline on your computer, but I'll show you what that looks like here in a minute. Now, if we were to continue scrolling down the live stream, this is basically everything that is there. So this menu is in the correct order. I would encourage you to start off with the welcome start here and the frequently asked questions. So the course materials you can find in the welcome start here that I'll mention. We are currently in class number 1. And with that, anything that I talk about within the class, if it's any type of document or download, they will be listed directly below the PDF. You don't have to run around figuring out what I mentioned or whatever it is. Anytime I mention a website or a link that's going to be pertinent to some of the things that we're going to be talking about, such as your aviation medical exam for your FAA medical, all of those links are going to be located in that section as well. And the important one here that I have in red is the FAA Private Pilot Testing Supplement. I would encourage you to download this on your desktop for your computer. It is a PDF copy of all of the testing figures, and sometimes people like to have the ability to kind of look up the testing figures and actually blow them up, and I'll show you how that works here in a minute. Beneath that, you're going to have our homework. So the homework is the recommended reading for the next lesson. So this would be for our Tuesday class. And for example, this Tuesday, we're going to be talking about aircraft systems and also flight instruments. The recommended text that I'll talk about here in about 20 minutes is the Rod Machado Private Pilot Handbook. If you have any other text, you can always use that. We also have the free FAA resources. So I do put in the downloads for the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge. So you have your aircraft systems here and your flight instruments. Now, when we say homework, this is not, read and understand everything. If you could just skim through the material, it'll really help you out when it comes to class time if you have that opportunity. If not, we'll basically cover the majority of everything. Here is that take notes basically opened up. So you can basically move this around anywhere on your screen. Just make sure to hit the save button, and you do also have the download functions, whether you want to print it out or save it in a Word document there. Finally, on this page, there is a quiz after every single lesson. Once again, we may not get through all the lesson materials today. If that is the case, you can postpone the quiz until we do, or if you want to take a good college try at it, you're more than welcome to give it a shot and see how far you get. There's two ways to access the quiz. The fastest way, scroll down on the lesson you're currently on, go to the very bottom. You'll see at the very bottom, it will say the free private pilot Aerodynamics class quiz. You can click on that. The second way of doing it is kind of on the menu bar on the left here. If you open up the class 1, you're going to see a little question mark, and it's kind of that's the quiz right there, right beneath it. Sorry about my squiggly line, but both of those clicks will take you to the same exact place. The quizzes are completely optional, but once again, I'd recommend you doing it. And they're basically going to attempt to cover the subjects that we covered in class. So this is an example of the aerodynamics quiz. Very simply, you'll have all of your questions at the very, very top here. They are color-coded. If you want to basically go back to a question, you can click the review question, and it will basically mark it in, I believe, a yellow color. And that way it'll kind of remind you before you submit your final quiz. You also have the ability to take these quizzes as many times as you want. Every time you take it, it will be updated to your profile so you can see if you're improving. And the other thing I'll also mention is that a lot of times there are a lot more questions than what we're going to show you. So for example, in aerodynamics, there are probably about 60 or 70 questions within the aerodynamic subjects. So if you retake the quiz, which I would encourage as well, you will probably see some new questions that you didn't see in the first option, and everything will kind of get jumbled around to try to make it a little bit more difficult for you. In order to get through the entire test, you're going to click that next button, which is the equivalent of save. Once you actually have answered, in this case, all 30 questions. Ours are a little bit, I think we only do 20 or so. This will actually turn into a submit button, and you'll notice that all the FAA questions are going to be basically multiple choice, A, B, or C. Now this one I picked out in particular because the question will always state refer to figure 2. Okay, so we post the figures right here, and of course for most people that's going to be a little bit small. So all you got to do is click on the figure, and what will end up happening is you'll see something that looks like this. If you need to continue to blow it up, just hit the magnifying glass. You can make it as large as you want. If you need to get back to the test question, just hit the X in the upper right-hand corner, and that will basically take you back to the original test question, which will basically look just like this. If you wanted to look up the figure in the FAA testing supplement, you would basically just find figure number 2 in that document, which is that PDF that I suggested that you downloaded just a few minutes prior to that. So here is the FAA testing supplement. This is what it looks like. Now, when you take the official FAA exam and you go into a testing center, they will actually give you a paper copy of this. And this is what you will physically have in hand so you can actually reference it. So very simply, if an FAA test question will refer or requires a figure or a legend, it's going to tell you at the beginning. And you can very simply just kind of look it up. So for example, there might be a question about figure 4, the airspeed indicator, and they might ask you about what some of the color coding is on this, which we'll actually talk about on Tuesday. Same thing here, we have figure 21, which is an aviation sectional. When they could ask you about something on that map, they could ask you about identifying features about an airport or airspace. They could also ask you navigation questions and these types of things as well. So a lot of times, especially when we get into the navigation section, this link is actually in every single lesson. So if you forget about it, you'll see it in all the other future lessons as well. When we start getting into some of the smaller charts, there's only so large I can blow certain things up on the live stream. So we do our best to do it, but sometimes it's helpful to have that PDF handy when we start looking at and answering those test questions. Now, you can take the quiz as many times as you want. Once again, if you need to check your quiz results, maybe you'll automatically be able to see how you did on the quiz, whether it was the right answer, the wrong answer, and there is an explanation for every question that we've entered in as well. So if you want to basically look back on your other quizzes in the past, if you go back to your home page, we've added this new function, which is the My Course Progress, which will actually take you to the page on the left. You can also access it in your menu by going to Courses and then going to Course Progress, which is a little bit more convoluted. When you see your profile, You're not going to have as many courses as me, but when you see your profile, find the correct ground school. This is the free private pilot GS10, ground school 10. And do not click on the name. If you click on the name, it will actually take you back to your the original course. It's kind of a weird system. What you want to do is click on these little carrots here. You'll see that this one is pointing to the right. If you click on it, it will actually expand the information below the course. And in this case, you can see that I took a quiz very, very quickly. The aerodynamics quiz, a 33%. I promise you I know it better than that. And it tells me the date and time. The one that we are looking for right here is the stats button. If you click the stats button, there's going to be a screen that opens up, and that will show you all the information about the original test question, how long you spent on it, whether you answered it correctly or not. If you did not, it will tell you what the correct answer is, and more importantly, it has the explanation beneath the test question just below it. Okay, so those are the things that I can kind of point out and recommend to you. All right, so the final thing that I'll also mention is in the event you need any assistance or anything with the course, keep in mind aviation related questions belong in the Ask a CFI. For everything else, no matter where you are on our webpage here, you will notice that there is a yellow headset on the lower right hand corner. If you hover your mouse over it, kind of sticks out like a tongue. In the event you are locked out of your account, can't figure something out, can't understand the mobile app or some type of technical issue, whatever that might be, just go ahead and click on that and submit a ticket. That's the fastest way where we can track it and you can track it and we can return the information back to you. All you got to do is click submit a ticket. If you're logged in, it will already pre-populate your Mr. Potato Head account in this example. We don't need a telephone number. Just be as specific as possible when you're filling it out. For example, we have over 1,000 lessons at this point. So if you tell us that, hey, on the last lesson, the link didn't work, we will probably send you a message saying, can you just let us know what course that was for and so forth, just to make sure that we correct it for everybody else. Okay, so it inevitably happens over a period of time. For everything else, you guys also have access to our Facebook group. And like I said, we have our instructors, moderators in there, and a lot of other students as well. So sometimes it's just for fun, but if you do have just a regular question, I wouldn't submit any technical questions there, like with the website or anything else. Just use the help desk ticket. But if you've got maybe an aviation related question, a lot of times you'll get an answer within about 15 or 20 minutes. So keep that in mind. All right, and then finally, the written test endorsement. This is what we all want to work towards. So just like any other profession, if you wanted to take the bar exam or potentially sit for, one of these CPA exams, you don't just get to walk into the testing center and sit down and take the test. There's usually some type of qualifications, and someone either has to give you an endorsement or basically allow you permission to sit for those exams. Same thing goes with the FAA. You can't necessarily sit at, just walk into a testing center and take your private pilot written without prior training. So most people will go through ground school. Some people will do it individually with an instructor. There's no right or wrong way to do it. At the end of the day, once we cover everything that we need to cover in this course, that is, you'll basically get a written test endorsement with your legal name on it, and that is what you're going to take to the testing center. And you can actually schedule your test and do that all online and then actually sit for the official FAA exam. Now, in order to qualify for the FAA written test and get a test endorsement from us or one of our instructors here, you do need to watch all 12 of the lessons. It could be live or it could be recorded, any combination there. You can watch it on the Check Ride Prep website. You can also watch it on our mobile app, YouTube, or Facebook. You can mix and match. The server does record it on all those platforms. Just keep in mind that we will only do YouTube and Facebook for the first week here. Then on the very last day of class, we do have our final exam. The final exam becomes available just shortly after that, and we are attempting to try to mimic the FAA exam. So in our case, it's 60 random FAA test questions throughout the course. The reason why I say work on those quiz questions is really because those 60 random questions that you're going to get are actually pulled from the quiz questions. It's out of a 950 questions that we have uploaded. You get 2.5 hours to complete it. Most people will complete it in about an hour, hour and a half. So it's usually more than enough time. And for us, you just need an 80% or higher. On the official exam, you need a 70% or higher. But those are the criteria to get our written test endorsement. For those that are participating in the FAA Wings programs, pretty much for previously licensed or currently licensed pilots, that is, It's basically a safety-related program. We'll talk more about it in the future, but you can actually get Wings credits for this course, and we've got a sign-up form. You don't need to take the final exam at the end, but you can basically watch and follow along, and we'll provide the rest of the information, probably a little bit more admin stuff on our 12th class, our last class, in terms of how to close out the course and what are we supposed to do with these and how do you get your completion certificates, all of that stuff. Okay. What is the catch? Now, this is a common question that we typically get, and as a reminder, just remember that there is no catch to this class. So I know that this probably was something that you saw on your Facebook feed or elsewhere, whether it was YouTube or Reddit, and this is an entire free class. It's 38 hours of programming, if you will. There is no catch. You'll basically be able to watch from start to finish. You'll be joining us on our live streams. If you can't make the live streams, you can watch the recordings after the fact once the classes are actually posted each day. In addition to that, you have access to our team of moderators for any real-time questions that show up, our Ask a CFI page, where we're also answering questions offline as well. You also have access to our Facebook group, the handouts, the documents, the quizzes, the final exam, and also your written test endorsement. We do not charge for anything along those lines. We try to make this as accessible to everybody as possible, and that's really what's kind of driven our mission over a period of time, as I said before. Now, one of the things that we do, and even though this is a free class, is we will basically terminate the free access at the end of our actual class. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. Their final exam will basically become available to you on the very, very last day of class. And after that, remember, in order to get your written test endorsement from our team of instructors here, all you need to do is pass the final exam with an 80% or higher. You have unlimited attempts to make that happen. I've seen students take the final exam 10, 15, 20 times in 4 or 5 day period after the end of class. And then just make sure that you have watched all 12 of the lessons. It does not matter whether you watch the live stream, whether you watch the recording. It also doesn't matter in terms of if you watched it on our mobile app or our website. The server is going to record it all the same. So our very, very last day of class is actually going to be on either a Thursday or Friday, depending on when you actually started. And we give you about 5 days after the last day of class, which is going to basically be Wednesday, May 11th, 2022 at 12 noon Pacific Coast time. That's when we're actually going to remove the course materials. So everybody here will have an opportunity to at least, if you need to catch up with any past lessons that you may have missed, or if you just need to kind of do a refresher prior to taking the final exam, you basically have an additional 5 days after our last day of class to make that happen. Now, the reason why we do this is it gives us that higher completion rate. Right now, we were about 95%, almost 96% completion rate. So if you want to think about it this way, every 95 people that, 95 out of 100 people that is, that take our program actually complete it and get some type of endorsement from us at the end of the day. And then 99% of that cohort will actually go on and take the FAA official exam, if you will, and pass it on the first attempt. If we left the course open basically year round, instead of doing it this way, we would not see the completion rates that we have on the screen here. As a quick reminder, though, this is kind of holding your feet to the fire. Everybody who starts with us on day one, we want you to finish with us on the last day of class. We're here to help you, whatever we can do, whether it's our team of instructors, whether it's just questions to our moderators who are also pilots and instructors themselves. So please feel free to use our resources that we're making available to you because we want you to be successful. Now, at the end of the day, we do also know that basically life happens and everything else kind of, comes or kind of hinders our progress. We have the best of intentions to basically complete a program, and occasionally, something comes up, whether it's a family commitment, something that shows up last minute at work. So we do also understand that as well. So we've always done this, and this is really kind of our member-supported program. It's really the few who pay for the many, and it allows us to have basically taught over 100,000 students to date. And we do also offer the lifetime membership. Not sure why it always comes with a double membership, but it is the private pilot lifetime membership, and we always discount it the first week of class. So this would actually give you, lifetime access with all the updates to the private pilot ground school program that you guys would be attending right now. And we actually do it in 2 different versions. There's a live class, basically a live stream class that you guys are watching, or we also take it offline. We professionally record it in the studio. So in this regard, instead of watching 12 3.5-hour lessons, it's more like 50 to 60 mini lessons. They're a bit more, direct. There's no breaks in there. So some people prefer that. Or if you basically want to get a jump start and get ahead of the curriculum, it's one way to kind of jump ahead of the class and see what we're basically going to be moving forward or maybe moving through in the next couple of weeks. We always keep it up to date. We're always kind of expanding it. We're already working on version 3.0 that's slowly being trickled out and released. With it, it also gives you unlimited practice quizzes and exams. So there's about 900 or to 950 FAA test questions that are available within our testing database, and you can take those practice exams as many times as you want. You'll also have access to our team of instructors here, which is 24/7, including Ask a CFI, email support, not necessarily email support, but our support ticket system, that is. You'll also be able to get your FAA written test endorsement and your FAA Wings credits at any point in time. You'll also be able to access our past webinars and attend any of our live seminars and Q&As when they become available. In addition to that, we also are throwing in the extra 2 courses, which is the Private Pilot Oral Prep course. These are basically courses that are going to, take you to the next step. So once you're actually preparing for your check ride, you're going to start to prepare for a part of that check ride, which is known as an oral. And that oral prep course is really there to get you to get you through what you need to know and make you successful at the end of the program. In addition to that, you also have the Private Pilot Flight Maneuvers course, which takes you through the 30+ flight maneuvers that you need to know as well. So these are all things that we just don't have time in our compressed schedule to kind of cover with you. And then finally, we also have our Private Pilot Companion Guide, which is a PDF companion guide. It covers about over 900 pages of content, has every single note and detail in there. All of our handouts are in there as well. There's places for you to take notes, and we actually had an instructor go through, and we've actually have about a little over 120 pages of course notes ourselves, kind of in an outline format that you could use and then kind of build upon as well. As a reminder, this is discounted to $147 for the first week, and we even make it easy, 3 payments of $49. And I'll say this again, this is not a requirement, but it's basically a very member-supported, program that we offer here, and allows us to basically continue our mission offering these free classes indefinitely. The other thing that we have always liked to do is the first 100 students that do sign up, they'll actually receive a 1-hour ground instruction lesson from our team of instructors here. You do not have to be here in person to make that happen, so just keep that in mind. Typically, we do these through Zoom, and you can bank it. You don't have to use it. It does not expire. A lot of people save it for a later date when they're basically preparing for a check ride, or maybe you are stuck on one of the subjects. Maybe it's airspace or communications that you need extra help with. Very simply, you'll have that in your account. You can utilize it at any time through our booking system to meet with one of our instructors one-on-one, and we'll answer any questions you have. Doesn't matter the topic as long as it's aviation related. So once those are gone, those are gone. And then finally, we'll move on to our mobile app as well. Finally, we also have our app as well. So this is free to everybody, whether you're a member or not. I would encourage you to download it. It is available for both Apple and Android devices, and you can find it within the corresponding stores for those. You can find it under Check Ride Prep, all one word, or Check Ride Space Prep. And within the mobile app, it's kind of like a miniaturized version of the website in your pocket. It does give you all the access to the materials, the videos, the handouts, the quizzes, and the exams. You also have the ability to download all of the videos offline. So maybe if you're going fishing with the family or something like that, or out for the holidays where Wi-Fi or internet access might be questionable, perfect opportunity to download the lessons, even these lessons from this private pilot class, and watch them offline as well in the near future. The one drawback here is that this app at the moment does not support live streaming, so you can only watch the recordings, can't watch any of the live material. Got to go to one of the other platforms for that. All of your progress is synced to the server, so whatever you do on the website will sync to your mobile app and vice versa. And if you want to do it entirely from the mobile app, you're more than welcome to do it. You also have the ability to send us messages and basically use all the same functionalities, such as searching for documents and basically participating in the discussion forums and so forth with everybody else. And it does not matter, whatever your preference is for. Okay. All right. So let us talk about any questions that you may or may not have at this moment. So right now, that was basically all the admin stuff that I wanted to cover. The next section that I really want to, hash out with you is, what does it take to become a private pilot? Now, if you have questions about how to get your endorsement, how do I log in, anything like that, this is a perfect opportunity. If you missed anything, maybe you showed up a few minutes late, throw your comments in the chat, and we'll do our best to basically answer that for you. So moving forward into this next segment, the question I'm going to have is going to be like, why should I get a pilot's license? What's the purpose of a pilot's license? What can I do with it? How do I get it? And before we do that, you guys know a little bit about us. You know a little bit about me and what I've done in the past. What I want to know is I want to know a little bit about you. So a couple things, couple questions I'm going to ask you, and you're more than welcome to share in the chat. Why aviation? Why is this a passion? Is this just an interest? Is this a career change? What got you interested in this? Maybe it's, you know, you've always geeked out on aviation. It's always fun to learn that. Where are you from? Are you located within the United States in a state or a country? What are your goals in aviation? Even if you don't know what they are, maybe it's just to sit through this class and learn a little bit more about, you know, what pilots do, and that's about it. That's perfectly fine. And where are you with your flight training? Have you started flight training? Do you know what flight training is? What is, you know, expected, and so forth. So what I'm going to do is I am going to share with you this video from a young man named Swain Martin. Most of you are probably familiar with him if you've done anything in aviation. Swain is basically documented his journey from when he was, I believe, 16, when he first got, first soloed, and then when he was 17, he got his private pilot's license. He documented parts of his journey going through the University of North Dakota, and then he became a commercial pilot for Mokulele Airlines out in the Hawaii area. And now he's actually flying for Envoy Airlines, which is on the American side, and he does a great job basically documenting his entire journey. If you want to know anything about kind of, really anything from starting off to be a pilot all the way through the airlines, this is a perfect opportunity. I would encourage you to check out his channel. Remarkable young man, and he's been gracious enough to continue to allow us to share this video with you. But what I want to do is let's go ahead and play this video. Feel free to chime in at any point in time, and we will learn a little bit more about each other.
Heading runway 27 right, clear for takeoff. Runway heading clear for takeoff, 27 right, 015.
All right, everybody. So thank you so much for sharing a little bit about where you're from. It's great to see, learn a little bit more about where the students are coming from. We have folks that are basically just starting out, people who have never flown, folks who are just maybe interested in more of the simulator. We've got business travelers. I saw someone, we've got our mechanics as well, our airframe and power plant mechanics. So when it comes to aircraft systems, we're going to get your expertise and help on Wednesday. We have folks in pastoral, basically pastors that are looking to fly for mission-related services. And one thing that I would encourage you to do as well is when you log into the website, I did actually post this exact question. Within our discussion forum, there's the exact same question. If you want to introduce yourself to others, feel free to post there as well. And I would encourage you as well, make friends and see if you can maybe even set up a study group. That has been very successful for students in the past just because there is a lot of information. Share notes. I have seen students basically take hundreds of pages of notes by the time they make it all the way through the course. So let's go ahead and leave it there. Let's do this before we get into what it takes to become a private pilot. Is approaching the top of the hour, a couple minutes early right now. Let's go ahead and take our 10-minute break. If you have any additional questions, we'll do our best to answer them during the break. The other thing I also wanted to remind everyone about from our friends at the IT services desk, just real quickly, is our servers. They're very, very beefy, but the problem is when we got 1,000 people trying to log in at the exact 5 o'clock hour, it kind of overwhelms the servers. So if anybody here maybe was a little delayed getting in, we do apologize. What I can encourage you to do from our IT team is just try to log in a little bit early. Even if you log in the morning and forget about it, the system keeps you logged in all day. That's really the main stressor or the point of entry there that kind of gets a bottleneck. So just kind of a tidbit. Let's do this. Let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break. Stretch your legs, grab something to eat, whatever your favorite beverage of choice is. I always say whether you need to recaffeinate, rebourbonate, rebaronate, whatever that might be. And we'll see everybody back in 10. the book that we recommend, and this is out of a lot of trial and error. In reality, let me just talk to you about it this way. In reality, if you pick up any private pilot textbook, whether it's Rod Machado's handbook, if you have Gleim, if you have ASA, if you have the King Schools, if you have Jepson, they all provide the same information. At the end of the day, instructors, as instructors, the job is to really relay all the information to you that you're going to need to be successful. The differences between all of these different modalities or really just kind of the publishers in this sense is the way that they present the information. So in past classes, I have used Jepson, I've used Gleim, and I've used Rod Machado. And at the end of the day, the reason why I kind of revert back to Rod Machado's private pilot handbook is really just because he takes really complicated topics. Like airspace is not really the easiest thing to digest, and he makes it very digestible, easy to understand. And these types of handbooks, it does not matter which one you have, or basically textbooks, if you will. These are going to be used for the rest of your career. The reality is that I have my old Jepson book from like 2000, 2001, and all of that information in there is still pretty much accurate and up to date. Really, the only new things that came out are GPS and some other new regulations like ADS-B that would be above and beyond the material in that book. Now, for the Rod Machado book, it is available, like I said, as a physical textbook like this. This is actually the second edition. We do not have any affiliation with the author, so keep that in mind. And I would encourage you, if that is something that you want to do, these books will also potentially fill in any gaps of knowledge. And what I mean by that is sometimes you need a different perspective. Maybe you're not understanding the way that I'm explaining the information to you. Maybe you're more visual. Maybe you need to read it. Maybe you just want some additional clarity later on when you might forget some of this stuff. And these are different reference materials that you could rely on year after year to really refresh your memory, because we're always trying to learn and educate ourselves as pilots. Now, if you have a different author out there, go with it. When it comes to the homework or anything else, all we're doing is basically having you read ahead about whatever the subject is. So, for example, on Wednesday of this week, we're going to be talking about flight instruments and also aircraft systems. So if you're not in the Rod Machado book and you're in potentially, let's say, a Jepson book, just go ahead and find those subject areas in that corresponding text. Does not matter. We're not here to sell you textbooks or anything like that, but I can encourage you. This is pretty much the one that I have relied upon and students have enjoyed the most over the years that I've taught this course. The other thing you're also going to need is an aviation chart, and the materials, basically number 2, number 3, and number 4, you will not need until the second to last class, and I believe that's the 28th, 27th of December. So you have plenty of time to basically track down that material. And what we use these materials for is primarily for flight planning. We're actually going to go ahead and pull the weather. We're going to show you how to actually plot a course using paper and pencil. And then we're actually going to be able to compute our aircraft speed, our ground speed, how long it's going to take us to get from point to point, and so forth. And that's called an E6B. So the FAA aviation chart, you can get it anywhere. They're available for basically any region of the United States. The one that I teach out of is going to be the Los Angeles sectional. And there are also some online resources that we'll share with you as well. But it is always good to have these in hand by that last week of class. These sectionals, if you want to just get a used one in the sense of just something that's expired that you're just going to use for basically educational purposes, feel free to do so. Does not have to be Los Angeles. I would recommend getting it in whatever part of the country that you're currently located in, but they will become handy. And the aviation charts are usually somewhere between like $8 or something like that. The next one is going to be the aviation plotter, and they come in two different forms. The first one is actually what you see. That's called a fixed plotter. The secondary one, those fixed plotters are about $5, by the way. The secondary one, this is basically a non-fixed plotter. It actually moves, so it has this nice little spinny thing right here. These are a little bit easier to use, but regardless, this is like $8 instead of $5. It does not matter which one you get. Like I said, these are a little bit easier to use, but I will show you how to use both the fixed plotter and also this kind of rotatable version of it. Then the final thing that you're going to need is some type of E6B. So the cheapest E6Bs are like $5 or $6. They are traditionally going to be paper. This is my original one from 2000, 2001-ish. And this is just a Jepson that cost, about probably $5 or $8 at the time. It has two sides. It has a wind side, basically goes up and down. And then on the back side, we actually have our flight computer here, and we're going to go through pretty much most of the functions here as we get to the tail end of the class. If you want to go supersized and buy the $30 one, this is one that a student donated to me a couple years ago. They all do the exact same thing. This is just metal and sturdier, but as long as you're not spilling stuff on it, like I said, this thing has lasted over 20 years so far, so you should be good to go. Now, all of these materials are listed in the Welcome Start Here. So if you never read that section, I would encourage you to take a look at it so you can reference it. There are some direct links to Rod Machado's website if you're interested in his book. I think it's like $50 or so. And it is a good investment as a pilot to have some type of text to kind of fall back on. It doesn't mean you need to buy every single textbook that's out there. We all have the exact same information. Within the Welcome Start Here, if you go under the course materials, we list the major companies, companies or aviation companies that have these different types of products. So I would encourage you to shop around. You can always buy a used edition. If you want to get a second edition of Rod instead of a third edition, that will work perfectly fine for this class. So like I said, these would be kind of the minimum amount of equipment or investment that I would recommend, and you will not need number 2, 3, or 4 until about 3.5 weeks from today, towards the end of December. Now, the other thing that is also available to you is the FAA does actually produce some pretty good material, and because it is a government agency, the materials are free. So there are 2 different books that are available from the Federal Aviation Administration. The first one is called the PHAK, which is the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge. And this is going to provide basic knowledge for the student pilots who are learning to fly, as well as pilots that are seeking more advanced pilot certifications, such as your commercial license and so forth. So throughout this course, if you go to the homework section, we basically have a copy of the chapter that we will be covering, so you have the ability to take a look at that as well. And the blue book on the right hand side is called the Airplane Flying Handbook. So the blue book we really will not touch in this class, but when you're getting out to the flight line and actually starting your flight instruction, this is going to tell you how to operate the airplane. This is going to tell you how to actually perform different types of maneuvers that are required as a private pilot. It also gives you your commercial maneuvers if you're getting up to that level. For those that want a physical copy of the book, you can always buy a physical copy. There's good to go, which is basically digital copies. They're all available for the taking, and we try to make it as easy as possible to find this information moving forward. There's a lot of different requirements, and you're going to hear kind of these terms such as ground instruction, which is really what we're doing here because we're teaching on the ground, and then the flight instruction portion, which is where you actually have to find your flight instructor in a flight school, and they're going to take you up in the airplane. This is not just take this course and you become a pilot immediately. So these are the requirements as per the FAA. If you are outside the United States, make sure to check whatever your local regulations are. But you do need to be 17 years of age in order to become a private pilot. And what that means is that is when you take your check ride. You can actually start training at any age. If you got your kid and maybe want to start flying at 8, they can actually accumulate flight time at any age. You can first solo at age 16, so you can actually fly by yourself. Some students have actually flown prior to getting their driver's license. And then you do need to be 17 by the time you take your check ride, which is going to give you or allow you to become a private pilot. The other basics are going to be to read, write, and also converse fluently in English, which is pretty easy for most of us. You will need to obtain at least a third-class FAA medical certificate, and we'll get into more about the medical here in a minute. And then you'll also need to receive and log ground training from an authorized flight instructor or complete a home study course. Number 4 right here, that is really the purpose of this class. So at the end of this course, if you successfully complete everything, you will get an endorsement from us that allows you to take the actual FAA exam. And when you take that actual FAA exam, our requirements are an 80% or higher from us. You, in reality, just need a 70% or higher from that FAA exam. But the higher the score you get, the easier your check ride will be at the end of the day. Okay, the lower the score, if you're on like the 70-ish percentage mark, you're going to probably have a little bit more explaining to do. Then what will end up happening is you'll have to basically accumulate about 40 hours of flight instruction, and I'll break what those hours are down here in a second. And then from there, you'll actually complete the final, which is basically a 2-step process. There's really 3 exams that occur before you become a private pilot. You're going to basically take some type of form of ground training, such as this course, and some people will actually do this entire ground training prior to even getting into the airplane. And I will tell you in advance that saves a ton of money, by the way. Some people will do it concurrently, so they'll actually be in ground school and actually be doing their flight training at the same time. So either way works. When it comes to your 3 exams, the first exam is really that FAA knowledge test that you need to pass. The second and third, once you're done with all of your flight training, is going to be called your practical exam. And your practical exam is composed of 2 different components, which are basically an oral portion and then a practical portion as well. So what can you expect if you're going to become a private pilot? Number one is you will have to at some point take the FAA written test, which is formerly known as the FAA knowledge exam. That's really what we're helping you to prepare. Remember that this course is designed to not just teach you the test. I don't like doing that. So we're going to go above and beyond. And at the end of the day, what we're looking for is we're trying to get basically, competent pilots who are proficient and also showing consistency in what they do. The flight training portion, the minimum hours is 40 hours minimum. That is the legal requirement. Keep in mind that the national average is roughly 65 hours. I've only had a handful of students do it in the 40-hour ranges. I have seen students do it in the high 90s. I've also had students who've done it in around 110 and 120 hours. Everybody picks up things slightly differently and at different paces, so just keep that in mind. Instructors will not sign you off to fly by yourself unless they feel that you are going to be a safe and proficient pilot, because anytime you hop in the airplane and you are basically utilizing that instructor's license anytime that you're flying because you do not have a license of your own. So they're going to really make sure that you're ready to go and that you're going to be safe doing that. Now, the way that I would describe flight training is really 3 different phases. The first one is known as your pre-solo phase, and this is really where we're trying to get you comfortable in the airplane. We're going to, make sure that you can fly straight and level. You're not really fluctuating in your altitudes. We can give you different types of turns. Then we're going to take you up to higher altitudes. We're going to work on some steep turns. We're going to do different types of slow flight, stalls, which are not too difficult. And then once we can get you to hold altitudes and do these different types of basic maneuvers, work on emergency procedures, we're going to take you much closer to the ground, about 1,000 feet above the ground. And we're going to start working on some basic patterns, such as turns around a point, which is basically a circle, around a fixed point, or potentially a rectangular pattern. And once we know that you can actually hold a specific altitude, we'll take you back to the airport and we're going to work on all of your landings, which we probably look more like smash and goes at the beginning. In my experience in the past, I think about 100 landings is what it takes on average for most students to really understand takeoff and landings. And then what this all leads to at the end of the day is the umbilical cord being cut and you being released to fly by yourself. That's the first time where the instructor signs off on a number of different endorsements in your logbook, and we wave goodbye, we cross our fingers, we make sure we did everything right and you're doing everything right. And that is where you get to depart by yourself. Kind of like training wheels without the instructor here. The next phase is going to be your cross-country phase. And when we mean cross-country, we don't mean Los Angeles to New York or anything along those lines. A cross-country in aviation is defined as point-to-point 50 nautical miles, direct line distance from whatever those 2 airports are, with a landing beyond the 50 nautical mile point. And throughout this phase, we will talk about different types of navigation, depending on how your aircraft is equipped. If it has GPS, we'll talk about that. We'll talk about the basic types. We'll talk about loss procedures, radio communications, etc. And then this will lead to a series of different cross-country flights that you will actually do yourself. So at the end of the day, you're going to need to do a minimum of 10 hours of solo, flying the airplane by yourself, and also 5 hours of cross-country flights with one longer flight, about 150 nautical miles. The final phase is we're really going to sharpen up all of your different things that we've taught you, your emergency procedures, your flight maneuvers, all these different things that you've learned and accumulated knowledge of over the last couple months, and prepare you for your final exam, which is called your check ride. Now, the practical test, also known as a check ride, is usually done either with an FAA safety inspector, which is less likely nowadays because government cutbacks, It's most likely going to be known or done from someone known as a DPE, which is a designated pilot examiner, who basically works as a contractor on behalf of the FAA. The first part is your oral, and depends on how well you know the information and the questions that are asked. It's very much a scenario-based exam. So prior to this, they're going to go ahead and give you some type of flight that they want you to plan. You're going to pull the weather. You're going to do all the planning. You're going to talk about it. They're going to ask you questions about, why you can fly the airplane and what would you do in these circumstances. And, this broke on the airplane. Can we still fly today? Those types of things. This can last anywhere from 2 to 5 hours. So it can be a long day. And assuming you pass the oral portion, that will allow you to move on to the practical portion. And the practical portion is where you're actually demonstrating everything that you learned to the examiner. You only get one opportunity to show each one of the maneuvers that they request. And depending on where you're located, if you're in a less populous area, it's usually about an hour. If you're in the LA area, sometimes it takes an hour and a half just because of additional traffic and delays. So you'll demonstrate different types of takeoffs, different types of landings. You'll do diversions, navigation, stalls, steep turns, emergency maneuvers, and the list goes on and on. So that's really what to expect moving forward. And keep in mind that, we, talk about, I guess finding an instructor and that type of thing. This is really going to be on your own. We can get you, and get you ready for getting in an airplane, but do your research and see who might be the best instructors or flight schools in your area. The one thing that I can tell you though is that the instructor is more important than the flight school. The flight school is there to maintain the aircraft and bill you and do all the administrative stuff. And while they control the prices and everything else, it's the instructor where you're going to be crammed into a very small space with this individual. I would encourage you to do your due diligence. You're the customer. You can hire us. You can fire us. If it's not working, find a different instructor and find someone that's going to jive with you, whatever your personality is. I can tell you based off of experience, engineers and lawyers, they want everything explained down to the last minutia and detail, while other students don't care about it. They just want to know what the high level thinking is and move on. And we all have these different learning styles, and we also as instructors have different teaching styles as well. So find that individual that's going to be best for you. And it might take some time. You can always do a discovery flight at a local flight school, which is basically either a 30-minute or a 1-hour flight, and it's usually slightly discounted. And all of your flight time counts. Your flight time, whether you did it 20 years ago, 50 years ago, or yesterday, all counts as your flight hours towards whatever the goal is. Okay. So if you have questions about that, there's plenty of pilots that are currently taking this class. I'm sure they can fill you in. You can probably also ask for recommendations from other students that might know some instructors or are currently working with instructors in whatever region that you're hailing from. A couple last minute things as well before we move on to the actual FAA medical and student pilot license is just some study tips for this course. I know a lot of this information for most of you is going to be new. It will be overwhelming, but please do not hesitate to ask for help from either us or your fellow students, your moderators. You also have a lot of other resources as well. And the way that this course was designed is it's not designed for you to just pass the written. So I don't ever teach the written test in the sense that you'll know everything you need to, but I'm not going to say, hey, if you see this is always A, or this is B, or C, or whatever. This is going to teach you far more than the minimum. It's going to teach you to basically pass the written, get through the oral, and also a little bit about the practical as well. I would encourage you to take advantage of all the quizzes and tests available to you. We have about 900 FAA-like test questions, and one of the reasons why I say FAA-like test questions is the FAA used to publish all of their test questions until about 2000 and 2001, and then they stopped doing it. So when new regulations came out, and students have told us that they see variations, we start to update those test questions to make them as similar as what you might see. And we've gotten pretty good feedback from our set of test questions that students are pretty much saying they're pretty much spot on with what they're seeing with the official exams. Continue taking the practice test, and if you're starting to see questions that you potentially repeatedly miss or you don't understand the explanations to, take a screenshot of it. We don't really use email anymore, but you can post it in the discussion forum for Ask a CFI, and we're happy to answer it for you, see if we can get you some more clarity. You also have access to the Facebook group. If you're on there, Just look today, it's actually, this is an older slide, 15,200 people in that group right now. And that's everybody from the instructors in our program, but you also have all of our moderators that are on right now helping out. They're also moderating in that Facebook group. You also have plenty of other pilots from a wide spectrum of talents. We have instructors in there as well that just randomly ask questions. If you want a question answered fairly quickly, that is the place to put it in there. The FAA testing supplement is your friend. We'll talk more about that as we get into those test questions. And then finally, you do not need to know everything. You do not need to write down every single word that comes out of my mouth. This material is going to be foundational, and it really, anything in aviation for the purposes of safety is, really lifelong learning at the end of the day. So you have to kind of keep that in mind, just like anything else. All of these things that you see on the left-hand side, these are basically the requirements for the private pilot airplane test. So there are 60 questions. You need to be 15 years of age or older to take the official exam. You get 2.5 hours to take it and 70% or higher on the passing score. Everything that you see kind of within that box, horrible little drawing there, is all the different topics that we're going to cover over the next, I would say 12 class periods, so about 4 weeks. So we'll talk about regulations, accident reporting, performance charts, radio comms, weather, everything else that you see down here. And this is the percentage of, out of those 60 questions that are asked, these are roughly the percents that you might be given on your FAA exam. Everybody is slightly different when it comes down to that. Okay. All right, let's talk about this crazy medical that everybody's scared about. The medical is really nothing to be concerned about. You are required to have a minimum of a third-class medical prior to becoming a private pilot. And it is recommended that you do actually, get your medical, before getting too far into your training. So if you do have any type of medical deficiency, you're aware of it before you spend thousands of dollars on a potential license that may not end up happening. Now with that, you do have to go to an aviation medical examiner. And those are we call those AMEs for short. Can't necessarily just go to your local doctor in this case. And honestly, they're pretty easy. So the third class medical is the most basic medical. It's designed for students, recreational and private pilots, really for fun, if you want to think about it that way. And then we also have some higher medicals. A second class medical is going to be designed for a commercial pilot. So if you want to get paid and you actually have a commercial license, that would be the one for you. And if anybody here wants to become a airline transport pilot known as an ATP, maybe working for FedEx or Southwest, Delta, any of those major airlines, that would be a first class medical. Regardless of the medical you get, you can get any one of these. I would encourage you, if you maybe want to do this professionally, just get the first class, make sure that there are no medical deficiencies that would apply to you. And, there's really no harm in it. For most of us out there, the first class medical, at least at the AME that I used to go to, the first class medical, the second and the third were the same price. So if it's the same price, just go with the highest available. Now, for all those magical questions that people I know are going to ask, or maybe have already asked, if I missed it in the chat, I have XYZ, this, that. I'm not a medical examiner. I can't really offer medical advice legally in the sense. What I can tell you, though, is that I've had a wide range of students with different and varying conditions get their medical. So I had a student once who was colorblind, and the only limitation the FAA gave him was he could not fly at night unless he passed a special light gun test, which he eventually did. You can see articles all across the spectrum. There are amputees that fly. We have people that have diabetes, heart attacks, people that have allergies. There's a wide range of things where the FAA is far more tolerant, and you can actually get what's called a SOTA, which is a form of a medical waiver. And you might have to maybe see the physician, the AME, a little bit more frequently, or you might have to get an additional test. And it takes a little bit more time to go through that process, but it's not something that is, completely foreign. Okay. So, as everyone's saying in the chat as well, AOPA is a great resource for medical questions, just generic medical questions. If you're unsure, maybe you have a condition where you're just completely not sure, use the AME locator, which is going to be below this live stream, and find an aviation medical examiner. And before you even book the appointment, you can just ask them. A lot of them are very friendly. You can ask them, hey, I had a heart attack 6 years ago and just wanted to know what your thoughts are before I actually make an appointment. And they'll give you their 2 cents. So AMEs, I know a lot of pilots, once they find an AME, they stick with it until the end of time. The other thing you're also going to need is going to be an FAA student pilot's license, which is basically this green card that we see on the right-hand side. Now, you do not need this to start flight training. You will need your FAA medical and your student pilot license by the time that you actually solo. So for most of you, that will probably be around your 10th to 15th lesson, which could actually be a couple months into the process. But the government, specifically with COVID and the definitely slower pace of the USPS, it takes a little bit longer to get your student pilot license. And right now, the quoted time is about 4 to 8 weeks, but I've heard some people getting a little bit sooner and some people getting it a little bit longer. But you want to make sure that you start this process. There's really no requirements. You just need to be at least 16 years of age in order to do it. You need to read, speak, and understand English, and then you'll need some additional information to fill out the actual FAA application that you can do online. The magical application that you're going to do is called IACRA, which stands for the Integrated Airman Certification and Rating Application. For those that are new to the system, you're going to go ahead and register. This is a government website. They're going to ask you a lot of questions, social security number, date of birth, all that fun stuff. They're going to make sure you are who you are. And once you actually, get your username and password, set with your profile all set, you're going to start a new application for a student pilot license. You'll fill out all the corresponding information, and very simply, you'll go ahead and submit that. Now, that's the first step. The second step is then you need to find either an instructor, or you could potentially go down to the FAA office if they've reopened in your area, and then meet with either the flight school instructors or the FAA representative. Now, this process is about 5 to 10 minutes, and what will end up happening is this has to be done in person, face-to-face. The check ride prep instructors, we cannot sign or authorize your student pilot applications. What will end up happening is the instructor or the FAA individual will basically make sure you are who you are. They'll have to input some information from your government-issued ID. They will sign the application. You will countersign the application digitally. And then they'll go ahead and submit it off to your local FAA office. So that's kind of the process. That's the reason why we can't do it over on our side, because you actually have to go in and put in your PIN number and do a few things like that. So most flight schools are very cool about it. If you find a flight school that's giving you a hard time, like, make an entire, deal about this, they might not be the flight school for you. This stuff only takes a few minutes to do. Okay. All right. The last thing, in terms of finishing out your training effectively, and someone was asking about this. So number one, if you're here, you're doing the right thing, you're participating in a ground school. So the reason why I say this and the reason why ground schools can save you money is that, and you'll learn this by the end of the first week here, is that by taking the ground school either prior to starting your training or in conjunction with your flight training, it's really going to reinforce your skills, and it's going to significantly reduce your training costs. So what ends up happening is a lot of times at flight schools, you'll go into a flight school, you'll know absolutely nothing, and guess what? As soon as that engine is running, that airplane and that flight instructor are over $200 an hour. Okay, so if you ask a very simple question, well, what does that gauge do that's sitting right in front of me? That could be a $20 question that you just asked, that you could have already, gone in ahead of time before you got into that airplane, just like we're going to cover all the flight instruments tomorrow. By the end of tomorrow, you will have a pretty good understanding of what the six-pack is, what the required flight instruments are, what do they do, how do they operate, how do you read them, and that's going to set you ahead of everyone else. It's the same thing as by Friday, you'll learn about airspace and charts, which will really help out. So anytime that you're in front of an instructor, they're just like a lawyer or anybody else. As soon as you are in the room, they are billing you that, anywhere between, I've seen $60 to $90 an hour, depending on where you are in the country. So by participating in these types of programs, that's the reason why you're significantly reducing your costs. Traditionally, if you go through this one-on-one with an instructor, the same material, and you were to do it for a 40-hour period, which is roughly the length of our ground school, it will cost $1,000 or more. Okay. Number two, Work with your flight instructor. As I said, try to develop a good working relationship with them and try to plan ahead. Good instructors will usually have a pretty good plan of action depending on where you are. And what I used to do for my students was basically tell them, hey, you know, what we're going to do on the next lessons, we're going to continue working on those stalls. This is the information I want you to review. Here's maybe some videos that you can take a look at. Here's some information that you can potentially look at or review as well prior to doing it. As I said previous to this, the airplane is really the worst classroom to learn. As soon as you're in the airplane, it's like the coolest experience in the world. But the reality is that you have so many different inputs coming into your head. You're getting information from your instructor about what you're doing right and wrong. The airplane has all these different switches, gauges, and things and sounds that are you know, interfering with it. Then you have a million people on the radio trying to, you know, talk to each other, and air traffic control is not going to make sense at times. Okay, that's the reason why we usually say it's better to learn a lot of this stuff on the ground, and come prepared and spend your time wisely. Okay. Number 3, if you can, try to fly 2 to 3 times per week. We understand that this is definitely not. This is an expensive proposition. Private pilot license nowadays can range anywhere from the cheap end to $6,000–$7,000, and I've seen the expensive ends, you know, $14,000–$15,000. So very simply, the reason why we say 2 to 3 times is it's very much just like math or anything else. I took a calc class in college. I can barely, like, you know, add and subtract now. It is a use it or lose it. Okay, so if you basically stop, you know, reinforcing what you're learning, you will basically forget the material. Okay, the more you fly, the less you forget. And in turn, if you have the funds or the abilities to do this, I would recommend it. If not, maybe even fly once per week if you can. The reason why we say this is that I had a student who used to fly twice a month, and we would finish one lesson and then he would come back 2 weeks later, and the next lesson that we did, we spent half the lesson trying to get him to remember everything that he forgot in that 2-week span. That's really what I mean. If you're doing it consistently, it's really going to stick with it. The last one, some of you will or will not agree with this. Stick with traditional training aircraft. So the most traditional training aircraft out there are going to be from Cessna or Piper. There are a lot of other variations as well in addition to this. The reason why I say that is that there are a lot of cooler aircraft. The Diamonds are really slick and cool. The Cirruses are awesome. They have a cool parachute attached to them that hopefully you never have to use. And the reason why I say that is that these aircraft are far more advanced. They're called TAAs, which are technically advanced aircraft, and they have more advanced systems, and they will typically cost far more per hour. Diamond costs about $180 an hour. I think on the high end for the Cirrus turbos, I've seen them upwards of $400 an hour in the Vegas area. Not only do they cost more, but it takes longer to actually learn the systems because there's so many different systems, you know, within these aircraft because they're so slick with the latest and greatest. Same thing goes if you want to learn. I'm still a fan of teaching on what we call steam gauges, which are the traditional instruments. We'll talk more about those on Wednesday. The glass is really, really cool. Those are those cool TV screens with all the latest and greatest, but you do have to learn about all those menus and sub-functions and those types of things, and that takes a little bit of effort as well. Okay. So the other thing as well is that the cooler aircraft that I just mentioned, they fly much faster. And when you're first learning, flying fast at 180 knots is not necessarily going to help you out that great because you will get from point A to point B in a heartbeat, and you're still trying to basically, you know, manipulate the controls or hold the altitude. Slower aircraft, while they're not as sexy like the Cessnas and Pipers, they move a bit slower. They're far more docile than those other aircraft. Now, that being said, if you are a pilot that is only going to be flying, let's say, a Cirrus or a Diamond for the rest of your life, maybe you just went out to the factory. I've seen this with another student. He bought the Cirrus before he even had the license. And if that is the case, then absolutely train on the aircraft that you intend on purposely flying beyond your training. But for the rest of us, we can always start with the less sexy, slower airplanes, and it's far easier once you get your license to just go ahead and do a quick checkout and then move into those nice, cooler, faster aircraft out there. Okay. All right, so what the heck can you do with this license? You can actually fly an airplane like this. This is a $6 million Pilatus. This is a single engine land aircraft. This would be a high performance, high altitude, complex airplane for those that are asking about all these wonderful endorsements. We will get into all those endorsements when we talk about regulations next week on Monday. So the private pilot is pretty much the major, or probably the most frequently issued license when it comes down to it. And the private pilot is going to be someone who can actually fly for both pleasure or business. But the key here is that you cannot accept any type of compensation for flying. Okay, there's very limited circumstances where you can be reimbursed. And we're going to talk about those in greater detail moving forward, specifically when we get to the regulations. So the private pilot certificate is pretty much the majority of active pilots hold this certificate, but there are others as well. There's something called a sport pilot, which allows you to fly light sport aircraft. It's a bit more restrictive. They're basically two-seater aircraft. They're a little bit less horsepower, and there's some other restrictions as well. And then there's the other one, which is the recreational pilot. There's like 50 people, 60 people in the United States that currently hold a recreational pilot license. And the recreational pilot license allows you to basically fly within 50 nautical miles of whatever your primary airport is. And this was something that was designed in the mid 50s or 60s when we all thought that everybody would own an airplane in the United States and we would use it to get from point A to point B. Never really materialized, and that was a more simplified version of your private pilot certificate. Your private pilot certificate allows you to fly during the day or night. It allows you to fly up to, but not including 18,000 feet if your aircraft is capable of it. You can also fly internationally if you have additional radio operator licenses and so forth for the aircraft. So this is just a very, very brief overview of what you can do and what you can't do. So let's just make this very clear. We will go into all of what you can and can't do on Monday, next Monday. So as a private pilot, it allows you what we call pilot in command authority, PIC command of any aircraft for any non-commercial purpose, and gives you almost unlimited authority to fly under visual flight rules. That's the VFR. So you're not allowed to fly through clouds. You have to be a certain distance above, below, and horizontally from a cloud, depending on which airspace you're flying through. And we will learn about those. But you do have the ability to carry passengers and or cargo as long as it's not for hire. Okay. Now, that's really the big thing. You cannot be compensated in any way, because if you are compensated, you'd have to be a commercial pilot or hire. Now, if you fly with other passengers, maybe you and your buddy are going to fly over to Vegas and the entire flight is going to cost $200. You can actually share, or what we call split, that expense equally, what is known as the pro rata share of the flight expenses, which do include fuel, oil, airport expenditures, and also rental fees. So if you have a $200 flight and you're going with your buddy, they could actually chip in $100 and then you pay the $100, as long as there's really no profit being made by the pilot in command. If they want to chip in $30 and you pay the rest, that's fine, just as long as you don't go beyond that 50% threshold. If you have 4 people that you're flying to Vegas, everybody can pay $50 a person. That also works as well. Okay. So this is just kind of a high level overview moving forward. So let's test your knowledge, and we're also going to test your ability to utilize the poll system. So very simply, this is an FAA test question. So let me get rid of the old question. I'm going to open the poll, and please do not answer in the chat. In regards to privileges and limitations, a private pilot may, what can they do and what can they not do? For those that may have missed the explanation of how to access the poll, just real quick here, look over on this side of my head, right? You guys see where it says type a message and then it says in regard to ... Go ahead and click the vote button. Select whatever you think the most appropriate answer is. That is how you get to the poll. So try not to give away that answer to your fellow students. Let me throw that question back up. Is the appropriate answer A, not pay less than the pro rata share of the operating expenses of a flight with passengers, provided the expenses involve only fuel, oil, airport expenditures, or rental fees? B, act as a pilot in command of an aircraft carrying a passenger for compensation if the flight is in connection with a business or employment? Or C, not be paid in any manner for the operating expenses of a flight? All right, we got about half the class in so far. Nobody has answered in the chat. Thank you so much for that. It takes us a couple more questions to get through that period. Give you guys about another 30 seconds and then we'll review that answer. But looking really good so far. Majority of the class has the correct answer. I got about 80% of the class in so far, so just waiting on those stragglers. And as we go through more and more of these test questions, everybody will seem to get a little bit quicker. Well, all right, let's go ahead and take a look at it. I'm going to go ahead and publish the results. I apologize if I cut off anybody. You'll get more opportunities as we move through the course here. So we got 77% with A, about 6% with B, and 15% of the class with C. So the majority of the class has the correct answer. The correct answer is A. It's not pay less than the pro rata share, which is basically the equal share, the operating expenses, which can include the following. It basically could involve only fuel, oil, airport expenditures, or rental fees. If we look at the others here, we had about 15% with C. And I like the thinking because you can't actually be compensated. But remember, you can actually, when we say not be paid in any manner, really the only manner that we could be paid in this example is basically splitting that cost, which is known as that pro rata share. So that's the reason why C is incorrect. B is also incorrect. Act as a pilot in command of an aircraft carrying a passenger for compensation. That's obviously a no-no. We do not get paid as a private pilot. That's a very easy way to lose your license, okay, or potentially get a violation from the FAA. Does not matter whether it's in connection of really anything. As long as you're being compensated to fly a person or a package anywhere, that is not allowed, okay? All right, and then finally, this is kind of the footprint for anybody that's trying to go above and beyond here. So remember, these are all minimum hours. We talked about the private pilot requirements. The minimums are 40 hours for the legal. And with the private pilot, national average is around 65, 75 hours on average. Once you do the private pilot, most people will then get an instrument rating. And this is usually going to be an additional 50 hours of flight time. And a lot of it is done by yourself, but this will allow you to then fly through the clouds using just your instruments instead of looking outside. So that's kind of the next step. If you want to fly people around for compensation, the most minimum level you'll get is called a commercial pilot, and the minimum is going to be 250 hours. Most people get very, very close to that amount. From there, a lot of different options at that point. Some people will get their multi-engine if you're doing this, professionally. Some people will become certified flight instructors and then teach other individuals. Some people will go to charter. Some people will do, photography, aerial photography, drone spotting, all sorts of different things. And, for those that are trying to go to the airlines, what you would need is to accumulate about 1,500 hours of flight time. And that will eventually lead to something called an ATP, or an Airline Transport Pilot License. And that will allow you to fly for any of the Part 121 or 135 carriers that we're all really familiar with as a whole. So there's a lot of different opportunities in aviation and a lot of things beyond just the basics, but that's kind of the general footprint of what it may look like. As I said, once people get to commercial, people kind of diverge paths in terms of how they accumulate those hours to get to 1,500. And once again, if you are interested in instructing, becoming a CFI, very, very rewarding, very easy way to build flight time, and you are getting paid at that point. The only thing I would encourage people to do is, if you know you do not like instructing, do not become an instructor, as you're really going to do a disservice to a potential student. All right. Do you have any questions about the private pilot license or the course in terms of anything that I've covered in the last a little over an hour and a half here? If you have questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. Once again, we'll do our best to get you answers to those. And if anybody did not have their questions answered from earlier, as I said before, I would encourage you to repost your questions. Sometimes we get so many comments that we may miss them and kind of everything that's going on. All right, now what we're going to do is we are going to jump into the actual what we need to cover for today. And we won't finish this section, but we're going to start off with the basics. And I guarantee you things will get a little bit more challenging as the night goes on. So gather some steam, and we'll take a break here at the top of the hour in about 8 minutes from now. So there's always going to be 5 basic components of any aircraft. It doesn't matter whether it's a small single engine or we're going to look at maybe a C-130 or a larger aircraft as well. And In our case, in general aviation, we always have what's known as the fuselage, and the fuselage is really, embodies everything that's really carried inside the aircraft. This is where you sit as the pilot. This is where your passengers, your cargo is also located as well, and your flight instruments. Then attached to that fuselage, we have our wing, and you'll hear that the wing is the thing that's actually what allows us to fly. It's actually the shape, or what we call the camber of the wing, and that's the design that's very important. We have our power plant in the front. In this case, our power plants on pretty much all of our general aviation aircraft, they're going to pull us through the air. Obviously, for those more advanced aircraft, we have turbine aircraft, which will push us. We have a landing gear of some type. For most GA aircraft out there, they are fixed gear, meaning they don't retract, they don't go up or down. And there are some general aviation aircraft that do have retractable gear that you can actually tuck underneath the belly of the aircraft once you take off. And then at the very back here, we have what is known as the empennage. And the empennage is really two different components. We have our vertical stabilizer, and then we actually have our horizontal stabilizer. And this is actually a French term. So you're going to see a lot of different terminology that will come from be from the French vocabulary, especially when we cover the weather section and so forth. All right, so let's take a look at each one of the different major, we would call our major flight controls. So there's 3 different flight controls that allow us to basically go up and down, basically climb and descend. They also allow us to make a turn to the right or to the left, which is called roll. And we also have a yaw axis as well. The first one we're going to look at is known as your ailerons. And your ailerons are usually located on the outboard portion of your wing. This is just a standard Cessna that we can see here. And we have basically an aileron on the right side and an aileron on the left side. And this is really going to be controlling your longitudinal axis. If you were to picture or draw a line straight through the spinner of the aircraft all the way to the tail and the back, this is what we call roll. This is what allows you to turn to the right or turn to the left. Now, anytime that you manipulate the flight controls, they actually move opposite directions. So what I mean by that is if you were to turn to the right, what that would tell you is that your turn to the right, one aileron is going to be up and one aileron is going to be down. So very simply, what would end up happening, and this is kind of an extreme case, if I turned all the way over, what would end up happening is I would have a aileron up here and I would have an aileron down in this case. And what that does is this one on the right hand side, as we're looking at it facing forward, this is going to create a lot of drag on the right hand side of this aircraft. So this wing is actually going to want to drop, and this one in the down position on the other side is actually going to create quite a bit of lift, and this is actually going to allow the opposite wing to actually gain altitude. So that's really what's allowing us to make that turn. Now in the most neutral position, this is called the trailing position. This is really the yoke is not really being pushed forward or back. Not the yoke, but the actual, we're not actually turning at any point in time. And the way that we actually control this is if you picture a yoke, if anybody here has seen like the new steering wheels from Tesla that look kind of funny, they're not literally like circular. That is pretty much what a yoke looks like. And if you were to twist that yoke to the left or to the right, that will actually move the ailerons up or down depending on which way you're actually turning. Okay. That's what allows us to actually roll this aircraft. Next one that we have is called your elevator. And your elevator is actually a component as part of your horizontal stabilizer. So this entire surface right here is called your horizontal stabilizer. And the back part of this is your elevator. And in order to basically control the elevator, you would take your yoke or your control column. And if I were to pull it all the way to my chest, pull it as close to my chest as possible, that means that the airplane is going to climb. If I push that yoke all the way away from me, closest to all those flight instruments, what we call the firewall, then the airplane is going to want to descend. And this is going to be based off of the lateral axis. So if you draw that imaginary line, basically following the wingtips there from side to side, that is your lateral axis. So that is going to be your other flight control known as your elevator. Then we have our rudder, which really we're going to talk a little bit more about, and you'll get a better idea of how to utilize the rudder on Wednesday. But this is really going to allow you to yaw, and this is based off of our vertical axis. We don't use the rudder to turn. We primarily use the rudder to stay coordinated in flight. And very simply, it is attached to the vertical stabilizer there. And in this case, it's actually the very, very tail end, that little yellow or orangish part that we see sticking out. The way that we control our rudder is, unlike a car has a gas or a brake. If you were to look inside of an airplane, on the pilot's side and the co-pilot's side, you'll actually see 2 foot pedals, and you can move those foot pedals to the right and to the left. And by basically moving your feet to the right or to the left, you're actually going to move that rudder right and left, and that's what that actually controls. When you're on the ground, you're actually going to use those same foot pedals to steer the nose wheel of the aircraft right and left as well. So that's going to be something that you're going to have to get used to. Funniest thing that we always see as instructors is students get in and they're always trying to turn the aircraft as if it's a car and trying to actually make the airplane go left by turning the yoke, which really does nothing. You actually have to use your feet, and it takes a little bit of getting used to moving forward. Okay. So with that, what we'll do is we're pretty much at the top of the hour. Let's go ahead and take that last 5-minute break. For all of our East Coasters out there, if you have to drop off, I completely understand. It does get late out there. The recording will be up about an hour or 2 after this class under the same lesson that you're watching now. And then when we come back, we will talk a little bit more about aerodynamics, and we'll actually start getting into the different laws of motion. We'll also talk about Bernoulli's principle. We will get into the airfoil design, which is the fancy word of saying how is the wing shaped. That wing shape is really what gets this airplane off the ground. So with that, go ahead and stretch your legs, take that last minute break, and I'll see everybody in 5. want to do is kind of take a look at this quick 7-minute video on aerodynamics. It's a little bit more of a cartoon, but it kind of puts together some of the principles that we've already discussed and things that we are going to discuss moving forward as well. So let's see if we can clarify it. Sometimes what I'll do is I will try to find other resources to interject in the class, just because, you know, static class can be kind of boring. And I think it's important to put in other perspectives as well. So you will see other videos depending on which lessons we are looking at. So let's go ahead and take a look, and when we come back, we will discuss. And I've got a test question for you. So think about how each one of those primary flight controls, either the rudder, your ailerons, or your elevator, what they're actually affecting in terms of what their purpose is.
If you have ever flown on an airplane, you know that it's an enormous-sized, amazing machine. A typical 747 can carry more than 500 passengers and weighs around 800,000 pounds when taking off. Yet it rolls down the runway at a speed of 290 kilometers per hour and, as though by magic, lifts itself into the air and can travel up to 13,000 kilometers without stopping. Incredible, isn't it? Today, we are going to learn how an airplane flies in a very simple way by going through the aerodynamics of an airplane, the main parts of an airplane, and controlling the airplane. The aerodynamics of an airplane. The 4 aerodynamics of an airplane are drag, thrust, weight, and lift. Drag, also called air resistance, refers to the forces acting opposite to the relative motion of any object moving with respect to a surrounding fluid. The energy it takes to push through the surrounding fluid creates drag. You may have noticed an excellent example of drag reduction in track cycling. The cyclist must push through the mass of air in front, but a streamlined sitting posture that cuts through the air more smoothly enables a cyclist to travel much faster, with less effort. The airplane always retracts its landing gear and nose gear into the body of the plane after takeoff to reduce drag. Thrust counters drag. It is a mechanical force that keeps the airplane moving in the air. Thrust is generated by propellers, jet engines, or rockets. The compressor inside the jet engine takes the air and compresses it, and after processing from the combustion chamber and turbine, the gas is blown out through the exhaust nozzle. Here, Newton's third law of motion is applied, where the gas is pushed backward and the engine is pushed forward. Weight is the airplane body, passenger, and luggage weight in total. Lift overcomes the weight and holds the airplane in the air. Lift is created mostly by wings to keep the plane aloft. So, to keep the airplane moving, flying straight, and level, this must be true, which means no net force acting upon an airplane. In any case, if drag is greater than thrust, the plane slows down. If thrust is greater than drag, the plane moves faster. If weight is greater than lift, the plane descends. If lift is greater than weight, the plane climbs. Parts of an airplane. The basic parts of an airplane are 1. Wings, 2. Horizontal stabilizer, and 3. Vertical stabilizer. The wing is the most important part of an airplane, since it produces lift that allows a plane to fly. A wing produces lift because of its slightly inclined and special shape, which is called an airfoil. This special shape is designed to deflect the air at the bottom of the wing due to more airstrikes at the bottom and less air at the top of the wing. As the airplane rolls down the runway, higher pressure and more upward force produces below the wing, and lower pressure and lesser downward force above the wing. The net result is the lifting of an airplane. Stabilizer. Stability in an airplane is a tendency to return to its initial state after a disturbance from that state. Horizontal stabilizer performs this function when the disturbance force causes the nose of an airplane to move up or down. Such movement is called pitch. Vertical stabilizer provides stability for a disturbance in yaw. Yaw is side-to-side motion of the nose. Controlling the airplane. So what are the components in an airplane which control the flight, direction, and height, and maintain the equilibrium? It's elevator, rudder, and aileron. The elevator can be deflected up or down to produce a change in the downforce produced by the horizontal tail. If the elevator is deflected upward, it increases the downforce produced by the horizontal tail, causing the nose to pitch upward. If the elevator is deflected downward, then the counteracting force causes the nose to pitch down. The rudder can be deflected to either side to produce a change in the side force produced by the vertical tail. If the rudder is deflected towards the right, it creates a side force to the left, which causes the nose to yaw to the right. If the rudder is deflected towards the left, it creates a side force to the right, which causes the nose to yaw to the left. Ailerons are located on the tips of each wing. Ailerons can be used to generate a rolling motion for an aircraft. Ailerons usually work in opposition. If the right aileron is deflected upward, then left is deflected downward, and vice versa. Let's see this. To curve the flight path, the pilot deflects one wing to move up and the other wing to move down by controlling the ailerons. With the left aileron in downwards direction, the lift will increase, whereas at the same time, the aileron of the right wing is in the upward position. Therefore, lift on the right wing is decreased. The result will roll the aircraft to the right. If the pilot reverses the aileron deflection, right aileron down, left up, the right wing will lift up and the airplane will roll to the left. The next time you travel in an airplane, you'll know how it works. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe to my channel for more videos.
All right, so just kind of reviewing, like I said, this is more of a simplified version for the way that this material is taught is as you kind of move up the food chain for everybody's knowledge out there. It really doesn't matter what the subject matter is in aviation. Like aerodynamics, you learn a little bit more every license you get until you get to the airline level where you learn pretty much everything. Same thing with weather and so forth, but you're always more than welcome if you want to do like deep dives. I know some people want to know all the ins and outs and nuts and bolts that we have for this stuff. You can always take a look at some of the texts that are out there. The best one for this stuff is called Aerodynamics for Naval Aviators. It's full of fun calculus-like questions and a bunch of physics type stuff, but it goes into greater detail about the sciencey stuff behind it. All right, so out of all that, like I said, simple question: what is the purpose of rudder on an airplane? Is it to control yaw, control overbanking tendency, or to control roll? Once again, for anybody that may have missed the last demonstration, I'm going to go to the live chat here real quick. On this side of my head, as long as you're on the website, you'll see all these wonderful people, moderator Ryan all the way down to Lou down here, and Travis. You'll see where it says the vote button, and this is under the chat. It says, what is the purpose, ... Just go ahead and click on the vote button. That'll bring up the test question. Select whatever you think the most appropriate answer is. Get back to the chat, hit the X. Okay, so just make sure that you are in that right area there. Please answer using the vote function, the poll, if you will, or the vote function, and not in the chat. Don't give away the potential answer to your fellow student. Good so far, though. All right, we have a little bit more than half the class in, just waiting for the other half here. By the time we're done with the first class, then we get rid of the that we see in the polls. All right, about 90% in, so just waiting for those stragglers. Right. Once again, I apologize if I cut off anybody that was not able to answer. Plenty more questions moving forward. Oh, oops, wrong button on that. We got 94% of the class, a little over 94% of the class actually with the correct answer. Just a few stragglers on B and C there, but A is the correct answer. It is to control yaw. The whole purpose of the rudder is to control yaw. If anyone said B, that's actually incorrect because ailerons control overbanking. And if anybody answered C, That's also incorrect because roll is controlled by the actual ailerons themselves. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and move on and talk a little bit more about some of the science, the low-end science, if you will, about how we get an airplane to fly. So here we actually have an airfoil. And very, very simply, this is, it has a specific design and shape to it that allows the airplane to fly. This is obviously in a wind tunnel, so we can see kind of the effects of what's happening. And there's always different parts. There's different parts that we can kind of label off of this. We have what is known as a leading edge over here. And we have a trailing edge over here. The shape of this is actually called the camber. And the upper portion of this wing is called the upper camber. And the lower portion is the lower camber. And we're going to talk more about stalls, but what we can see is that when we have, when the aircraft is producing lift, we are actually looking for what is known as smooth laminar airflow that is perfectly pretty much that airflow that's glued to that wing. If you start increasing the angle of attack enough, you'll start to see that airflow kind of over here start to actually separate from that wing is right at that moment. And I'll show you what this looks like in flight. In a little bit down the road. Now, before we actually talk about, you know, the exact design and how this actually works, we have to actually go back to the basics. So this is kind of like a little bit of a review of Newton's 3 laws of motion, or basic laws of motion, that is. So the first one is Newton's first law. So every object will remain uniform unless acted upon by an external force. So the example of this is if we have an airplane is actually going to move when we apply a force to it. Second law is force equals the mass times acceleration. So the acceleration rate of an object is directly proportional to the applied force and inversely proportional to the inverse mass. So very simply said, the more force that's applied, the faster that this object is actually going to move, or what we call acceleration. And the third law is for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So for this, we're going to talk about anytime that we basically have thrust on a single engine piston aircraft, we will have something called left-hand turning tendencies. So we're going to look at different factors that want to make us turn left on Wednesday's class moving forward. The other principle that we need to look at is basically known as Bernoulli's principle. And Bernoulli's principle, it actually explains what happens to the air passing over the curved top part of the wing. And this is done using what we see here, where we have an air pressure that basically goes through a venturi, or what is known as a venturi tube. And it's just a tube that has a narrowing in the center portion of it. And what we can see from these gauges here at the top is that as the air enters, we can see that the velocity and the pressure actually remain constant. When that air goes through that venturi portion of the tube, the velocity actually increases and the pressure decreases within this section. And then when it goes out the back end here, then the velocity and the pressure are basically equalized. And as this velocity, in this case, it's going to be air is going to be increased, the pressure within the fluid is going to decrease. So taking a look at this and we apply Bernoulli's principle, we have our different parts of the wing. And very simply, when we look at the leading edge to the trailing edge, what you would do is if I had a string and I basically took that string and I went from the leading edge to the trailing edge and over the top portion of the wing, which is known as the upper camber, that string is actually going to be a little bit longer. And if I had that as another string towards the bottom string is going to be it's going to be slightly shorter than the upper portion of the wing. So what that means is that those air molecules that are hitting the leading edge, the ones that are basically traveling on the upper portion of the wing, the upper camber, they have a greater distance to travel. And because they travel a greater distance, they travel at a faster speed. And that means that it is actually at a lower pressure. The air that's moving underneath the wing travels at a slower speed, but a higher pressure. And then this is basically resulting in lift. Okay, so that's what actually makes the airplane get into the air, and it's specifically the design of this airfoil, this wing, that allows this aircraft to actually take off. So the air is going to always tend to flow from high pressure to low pressure, and then as I stated, the lift is created at the end of the day. Now lift is created because of the way the wing is actually shaped, and then it's the engine that actually provides the power actually gets us, gives us the power, but it's also the propeller itself. And keep in mind, the propeller is a type of airfoil. It's just one that's kind of vertical instead of like the wing that's horizontal. And your propeller actually converts that power into thrust, and then it pulls the airplane forward. But it's the airfoil shape of the wing, this design of the wing, that creates lift. And then as the speed builds, it's going to lift the airplane off the ground. And then from there, as the pilot, we can actually move those different flight control surfaces, the rudder, the ailerons, and also the elevator, to basically change the shape of the wing, and also allow us to basically control the aircraft however we want to. So here are the different parts of the wing. As I said before, we've got the leading edge, and you can imagine that's actually the first part of the wing there. This is our leading edge, and this is our trailing edge. The upper camber is just the upper portion of the wing. Lower camber is the lower portion of the wing. It's kind of that shape of the wing. If you were to draw an imaginary line from the leading edge to the trailing edge and then out in front of the aircraft, so very simply, my imaginary line from the leading edge to the trailing edge and then all the way forward beyond the actual physical structure of the wing, that is known as your chord line. Okay, so that's known as your chord line. The other thing that we also need to know is that we also have something called the relative wind. And the relative wind is basically hitting the leading edge at the very front of the wing. Now, the angle between the relative wind and the leading edge, which is this section right here, that is known as the angle of attack. And that's going to become important because if we exceed what is known as the critical angle of attack, the aircraft is going to stall. It's not going to be able to produce the lift that's necessary to keep the airplane in the air. Okay, so the most important ones that I can give you is understand what the chord line is, which is that dotted line. It's an imaginary line that goes from the trailing edge to the leading edge and then out in front. And then the angle of the attack is the angle between the chord line and the relative wind. That's the best way that I can describe it for you. All right, pushing forward, a couple of FAA test questions. If anyone gleamed them, skipped a question there. Let's test your knowledge and see what you remember. It should be fairly easy. Once again, do not answer in the chat. If you need me to show you where that vote button is, I'm happy to do so. Just make that request. So this question is relating to Bernoulli's principle. Which statement relates to this principle? Is it A, for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction? B, an additional upward force is generated as the lower surface of the wing deflects air downward? Or is it C, air traveling faster over the curved upper surface of an airfoil causes lower pressure on the surface? If you're 10 knots from your VME, it's like coffin corner to me. Please remember to answer in the poll. Got a little bit more than half the class in so far. Looking good on the answers though today. These are, these are the exact same questions that you will see on our quizzes and our exams, and they're fairly similar, like I said, to the FAA test questions on the official exam. I try to pull some easy ones for the first class. I will try to pull the more difficult or challenging ones, ones that students get, frequently wrong, just because it's easier to kind of point those out, so that way you don't make those same mistakes and we can talk about it. All right, got almost everybody in. I apologize if I cut off. All right, good. 11% with A, 9% with B, a little over 78% with C. The C's do have it. Remember that Bernoulli's principle, the best statement that applies here is really going to be C. When we look at this. So it's air that travels faster over the curved upper surface of an airfoil causes lower pressure on the top surface. Okay. The other statements that we see here, A and B. A is incorrect. Every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. That's actually Newton's third law. E is also incorrect. That's because that's also referring to Newton's third law as well, at least the application of it. So a majority of the class got that correct. One more for you before we move on. So kind of think about the different parts of that airfoil. The term angle of attack is defined as the angle. Is it A, between the wing chord line and the relative wind? B, between the airplane's climb angle and the horizon? Or is it C, formed by the longitudinal axis of the airplane and the chord line of the wing? How do you like it, Keith? Try to do the polls, make it a little bit more interactive. Test your knowledge, make sure everybody's on the same page before we continue the road here. All right, a little bit more than half the class has answered so far. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at this one as well. We got the majority of the class with the correct answer, a little over 84%. So the term angle of attack is defined as the angle between the wing chord line, which is that imaginary line that goes from the leading edge to the trailing edge, and the relative wind. Okay. For those that said B, only a few people, 5% of the class said B. The angle between the airplane's climb angle and the horizon, there's actually no specific aviation term for that, so it's kind of just a misnomer there. And then for C, that's a little bit more advanced topic, but if anybody said that, that is actually the definition of what is known as the angle of incidence. The angle of incidence is the angle formed by the longitudinal axis of an airplane and the chord line of the wing. You would not actually learn about that until about commercial level. All right, let's go ahead and look at the four forces. So what actually gets these big aircraft off the ground in these cases and allow it to do amazing things? There's only four forces, and they basically work, against each other. We have lift, which actually gets the airplane off the ground that we discussed. And what actually counteracts lift is going to be the weight. And the weight is comprised of the entire weight of the aircraft, the payload, the passengers, the fuel, the oil, really everything, including what is known as the basic empty weight. We're actually going to talk about how to calculate your weight and balance for an airplane and why that's important in future lessons as well. We have our thrust. In this case, that is basically pulling us along. And we have drag, which is trying to slow us down. And there's several different types of drag that we're going to talk about. The first one we'll get through, which is really going to be the easiest, is going to be considered thrust. So for our purposes, we're not going to be talking about, these great big aircraft, probably, I want to say an Airbus in this case, that are jet powered. We have piston powered engines. And it's really this, as I said before, that propeller on the front of the piston is actually an airfoil, and it's the shape of that propeller, that airfoil, that takes the energy and it converts that power into thrust, and then it pulls the airplane forward. Okay. Thrust is going to act parallel to the longitudinal axis, and however, this is not always the case, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Now, what counteracts thrust is what's always trying to slow us down. It's drag. You can think of drag as like if you had like a parachute behind you and you're trying to run forward, the parachute is there to slow you down. Okay, that's probably the simplest way to explain it. So drag is the force that resists the movement of an aircraft through the air. There's two basic types of drag. We call it either parasitic drag or induced drag. So the first one, parasitic drag, is going to be drag that is really not associated with the production of lift. And what we like to say is it increases as the square of the airspeed increases. And for those of you that need an image, I'll show you an image here in a second of what that actually looks like. And what parasitic drag is usually comprised of is it's all the things that slow us down. It's the wing struts and all these different things that stick out from it. It's usually going to be nuts, bolts, antennas, rivets, all sorts of things like that. And then we have the other type of drag, which is known as induced drag. And this is drag which is caused by the same factors that produce lift. And the amount is actually going to vary inversely with your airspeed. So as the airspeed decreases, the angle of attack must be increased. So what that means is that as we move slower and slower, we actually have to pitch up a little bit more and a little bit more in order to maintain the same altitude. So the best way that I can kind of describe this for you is that for most of us out there, we're probably at least of driving age. So when you get to a four-way stop, okay, and you come to a complete stop and you need to make, let's say, a left-hand turn, how much do you actually physically control or basically turn your steering wheel to make that left-hand turn from a dead stop? Okay. Most of us, we're probably going to have to turn about 180 degrees in order to make that left-hand turn, right? It's actually fairly significant. And if we increase that speed and we're on the freeway, right, driving along, and I want to go from this lane to the left lane, how much do I actually turn it going 60 miles an hour? It's pretty much like a quarter of an inch, right? And I'm already in the next lane. Same thing applies as we are actually flying along. The slower that we go, remember that there's less air moving over our airfoil, and we actually have to apply or basically have greater pilot inputs in order to get the airplane to do what we want. So as we start to go slower, what we actually have to do is we actually have to start to pitch up, which as we pitch up, that's going to increase our angle of attack in order to maintain the same altitude without actually losing altitude as well. But if we continue pitching up enough, we will actually get to what is known as a stall that we'll talk about here in a minute. Now, the other thing is that the parasitic drag is actually broken into three subtypes of drag as well. So the three parts are form drag, interference drag, and skin friction drag. So form drag is pretty easy. It's really anything that sticks out into the airstream that's obstructing the airflow. Wheels, antennas, rivets, anything else that you can possibly think of that is creating any type of drag. The interference drag is going to come from the intersection of the airstreams that cause eddy currents, turbulence, or restricts smooth airflow. So very simply, if we have an airplane, and this is basically where you and your passenger sit, and then extending off of this is you're going to have obviously your wing. Well, you're going to have really smooth airflow over the top portion of this wing, but the problem is that you get these little disruptions where the wing actually meets the fuselage, and that is called interference drag. Okay, and that's really what's going to restrict that smooth laminar airflow that we're always looking for. Okay. The last one that we have is called skin friction drag, and this is just aerodynamic resistance due to the contact of moving air with the skin of the aircraft. So the faster you go, it will actually be a little bit higher. Okay, so this is actually what keeps wings actually warmer than usually the outside air temperature when airliners are flying at faster speeds as well. So let us look at a chart that basically represents the different types of drag, see if we can put it into perspective. And these are usually called drag curves. Okay, there's a couple different variations of these, but very simply, we've got our induced drag and we've got our parasitic drag. So let's pay attention to the blue line here. If we are pretty much at a dead stop right here, and we're not really moving, that is the lowest or least amount of parasitic drag. But as the aircraft starts to actually roll down the runway and take off, that parasitic drag is actually going to start increasing because there's more airflow, and then that is where the parasitic drag comes from. Induced drag is just the opposite. It is inverse of your airspeed. So that starts with the purple line up here, and very simply, our induced drag is really highest at lowest speeds, and it starts to decrease as we actually move faster. So what ends up happening is as we move faster, our parasitic drag is increasing and our induced drag is decreasing. And then what we see at the very top here is this is called a total drag curve. And what this does is this takes into account the total drag of parasitic drag and induced drag. And what manufacturers do and engineers do is they always have these little drag charts, or drag curves that is, and the very, very bottom of this drag curve is actually what is known as the most efficient speed. So a lot of times this is actually going to be your They will come up with these for either a maximum range, like, this would be the airspeed that you want to fly at in order to fly the furthest distance, or they could have a max endurance, which would be, this is the airspeed you want to fly at to basically fly for the longest period of time. Endurance is time, and range is going to be based off of nautical miles. Okay, so this is also how we typically come up with our gliding distance. So if we actually lost an engine, we would want to be at our basically it's a glide speed, and every aircraft is slightly different, where we're going to have the least amount of drag, and we're also it will allow us to basically fly or glide, in this case, the longest period of time and not have a penalty for drag. All right, then we've got our weight. Weight's pretty easy. This is just the combined load of the aircraft itself. And the basic empty weight is just the basic airframe with basically, oil and then unusable fuel that's listed in there. That also includes the crew, the fuel, the cargo, and the baggage. And then this is the downward force on the airplane. It's caused by gravity. It directly opposes lift, and and there's always going to be a center of gravity, or a CG point, in which it pulls down. And this is always going to act straight down towards Earth. Okay. Last one that we've got is lift, which we talked a little bit about before. So we're not going to go into greater detail, but lift is what opposes the downward force of weight and is produced by the dynamic effect of the air acting on the airfoil. So it acts perpendicular to the flight path through what is known as the center of lift. Now, every time that an aircraft is rolling down the runway, as soon as that wheel gets off the ground, just like that, that aircraft is generating lift, which will then in turn generate what is known as wingtip vortices. The wingtip vortices are basically things that, best way to describe it is, you can see that off of each of the wingtips, the right wingtip and the left-hand wingtip, we have a clear vortice through this smoke generator that this aircraft is flying through. They are invisible unless an aircraft is coming out of fog or clouds, where they're definitely a lot more visible. But what ends up happening with the wingtips is, because we have the lower pressure on the top of the wing and the higher pressure on the bottom of the wing, we talked about before in generating lift, what will usually end up happening is that this air from underneath the wing where the pressure is going to be high, it's going to actually start to move forward, and then it starts to actually spiral off of each one of the wingtips on the left side and the right side. Okay, so that's kind of the diagram of what it would look like. Now, the reason why we talk about these wingtip vortices is this actually creates something called wake turbulence, which is a hazard for pilots. So wingtip vortices, they pose a pretty significant hazard to aircraft, especially during the landing and takeoff phases of flight. And the intensity or strength of the vortex is going to be directly related to how big the aircraft is, how fast or slow the aircraft is, and the configuration. Is it gear up, gear down? Is it flaps full, flaps not? And the strongest vortices are going to be produced by heavy aircraft flying slow with wing flaps and landing gear retracted. So what we say is heavy, slow, and clean. And this is most typical after a takeoff. So as soon as an aircraft takes off. Now, there's different wake turbulence categories that the FAA has. Basically, it's low, medium, and high. For the purpose of general aviation, we are all going to be in the low category. But that, obviously, if you were going to follow behind a larger aircraft, whether it's a business jet might have enough wake turbulence to potentially roll your aircraft or do greater damage. If you were following one of the worst offenders out there, which is the Boeing 757, that would probably rip the wings off of your aircraft, okay, if you're following too close. Now, air traffic controllers, they are always attempting to try to ensure that there's some type of adequate separation. They used to do it based on timing, but that changed more recently, and now it's based off of nautical mile distance, depending on the different types of aircraft that you are going to be following in. So if you're going to be following in, if you're a Cessna, you're following in a smaller Cessna, you might experience slight wake turbulence, really no big deal. You're going to follow in something much heavier, maybe a larger business jet or something bigger. You do definitely need to take precautions. There is actually a story a couple years ago. Over the summer, there's an A380 flying somewhere in the Middle East, and there's a Challenger jet, which is actually a fairly large jet. I think it's like 60,000 pounds, and they were only flying 1,000 feet below this A380. They had the appropriate separation. Nobody did anything wrong, but the Challenger business jet got caught in the wake turbulence of the A380. It lost control, rolled multiple times, and the pilot was actually able to recover somewhere around, I think it was like 5,000 or 6,000 feet. And the aircraft was written off, completely destroyed, just because of this. So they actually started increasing it based off of distance instead of time that they used to rely upon. For those that were asking about, wingtips, I'm sorry, whatever the question was earlier that someone said, basically the things that you see on the end, which are basically wingtip, call them EWTs, but they reduce the wake turbulence, but it's really not to reduce wake turbulence. It's still going to have wake turbulence. It's primarily there for fuel efficiencies. Airlines only do things if it's going to save them money at the end of the day, and those actually save money. So the way that we avoid wake turbulence is pretty simple. We don't follow too close behind another aircraft. And the way that the wake turbulence is going to move is really going to be dependent upon what the winds aloft are doing. So if it's just a calm day, the wake turbulence will generally sink at a rate of about 500 to 1,000 feet per minute as it rolls off of the wings. Okay, that would be a place that you definitely want to avoid. Be careful if you're following a larger aircraft within 1,000 feet. And then there's another thing that we do when we take off or we land. Now, wake turbulence is only going to be it's going to be generated because it's a byproduct of lift. So as soon as an aircraft takes off, it's going to generate wake turbulence. As soon as the wheels touch the ground upon a landing, that wake turbulence ends immediately. So the way that we avoid this is we'll talk about following or taking off from behind an aircraft. So what we do is we note where this aircraft has basically what we call rotated or basically lifted off the ground. Okay, and our goal is as pilots is that we want to take off prior or preceding where that aircraft rotated. So what I would want to do is as I'm basically traveling down this runway here, I would want to rotate a little bit earlier and then try to stay above wherever their flight path is to avoid the wake turbulence. Obviously, that's probably aggressive for a small airplane. If I'm following a larger airplane, I want to note where did this aircraft touch down? And I want to land an airport. General direction, and let's say that you are right here and you've got a nice large jet rolling down the runway. That wake turbulence, based upon what the wind is doing, might actually blow that wake turbulence into your lane or basically your runway, so you want to potentially delay your takeoff. Just because you're given a takeoff clearance, you'll learn that, it is to act as pilot in command safely. And if you think that wake turbulence is going to be an issue, then let them know that you're not ready. You'd like to, stand by and basically let it die down for another 60 seconds or so. Okay? Now, another thing that happens is something called ground effect. And ground effect is going to occur basically when we're flying within one wingspan or less above the surface of the ground. And within this given area, the airflow around the wing and the wingtips is actually modified. And it's really modified because we are now introducing something that is not normally there, which is the ground, right? And the air, which normally has a certain path to travel, is now basically hitting the ground and basically being deflected back up into it. That's the easiest way to think about it. But it creates this downwash. And the changes can actually result in the aircraft becoming either airborne a little bit earlier before the recommended takeoff speed, or what we call floating when we're basically trying to come in to land. If you come in too fast to the runway, you have too much energy, you're basically kind of floating in this little downwash area, and you're trying your darndest to put the wheels on the ground, but the airplane just doesn't want to go down. Okay, the ground effect, once again, is going to be an area above the ground where the aircraft experiences an improvement in performance. And it is simply a reduction of induced drag because as the aircraft in flight becomes within a wingspan, a length of the surface, There's going to be a change in the three-dimensional airflow. That change is the introduction of the ground beneath the airplane. Okay. That three-dimensional airflow of the aircraft, because the vertical component of airflow is restricted by the surface. Now, the wingtip vortices, the upwash and the downwash are going to be greatly reduced because of ground and water interference. So what we mean by water interference is that's going to be for anybody that wants to become a seaplane pilot. It works the exact same way. You will experience ground effect. The water will actually act very similar to the ground in that circumstance as well. Okay. Any questions so far? Anybody lost? All right, so let's look at another test question. These are not as difficult. So let me, give me 1 second. Let me throw this in. Somehow this did not make it into, real quick, a random one. On the second. Sorry about that. This one was missed when I was entering these. So just use the generic vote button there. It's just going to have an A, B, or C. So what is ground effect? Is it A, the result of interference of the surface of the Earth with the airflow patterns of an airplane? B, the result of an alteration in airflow and patterns increasing induced drag about the wings of an airplane? Or C, the result of disruption of the airflow patterns about the wings of an airplane to the point where the wings will no longer support the airplane in flight? I got a little bit more than half the class in so far. And we're about 8% now. Not sure what the problem was with the F-22, if it was ground effect or not. Else might know in the class more than I do. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at this one. We've got, sorry, I think I cut one off there. We've got about 83% of the class with the correct answer, which is A. So the best way to describe ground effect is the result of the interference of the surface of the Earth with the airflow patterns of the airplane, because we're basically introducing, something below the airplane that's going to create this ground, we call it ground effect, which is really just that 3D, changes the three-dimensional airflow around that airplane, because some of that air is now being deflected back from the ground. For those that said B, B is once again incorrect. And that's because induced drag is actually decreased. So while the statement is partially true, that induced drag is actually decreasing, not increasing. And then for those that said C, that's also incorrect, because we actually have the disruption of the wingtip vortices, which actually increase lift. So while partially true, it's not going to be no longer support the airplane. It actually increases lift. All right, great job everyone on that one. All right, the last thing that we're really going to cover tonight, we'll try to get you guys out of here next. Give me like 10 more minutes, everyone, and then we'll open it up for questions. Is going to be stalls. So some people get very, very, intimidated by stalls, and there's really nothing to be intimidated by. You'll have a better understanding of, how to actually recover from stalls, and you'll have an opportunity to practice two different stalls. One is a departure stall, which is basically full power. You'll also practice what is known as an approach to landing stall, which was, we used to call it a power off stall, with basically no power and our slowest airspeed possible. So one thing that you want to note is that a stall can actually occur at any airspeed. You could go really, really fast and stall the airplane. You could go really slow and stall the airplane. So, airspeed is not really a factor in this. The real definition of a stall is you can always stall an aircraft if you exceed the critical angle of attack. Okay, that's going to be kind of the given. And that angle of attack is usually going to be somewhere between 16 to 22 degrees. It depends on the aircraft, the manufacturer, how it was designed, and so forth. But you do have the ability to stall the aircraft at any pitch attitude or any airspeed, fast or slow. Okay. Anytime that we stall an aircraft, it's going to result from a rapid decrease in lift caused by the separation of the airflow from the wing's surface, and this is by exceeding the critical angle of attack. That first image that I showed you, remember that image from the wind tunnel? What we had was we had that nice stream of air, and what we call that is smooth laminar airflow. That air is basically glued. It seems like it's pretty much glued to the upper surface of the wing, that upper camber. It's following it perfectly and nicely. As you start to increase the angle of attack and you start to get very, very close, if not exceed the critical angle of attack, you'll actually start to have separation of that smooth airflow, and you'll start to actually see these little burbles here. Probably not an official term there, but that smooth laminar airflow is going to start to separate, and because of that, you're not going to be able to generate enough lift to basically remain at your altitude. So in a stall, the wing does not totally stop producing lift, rather it just can't generate enough lift to sustain your level flight. Now the stalls, there's a couple different stalls that we'll talk about. We'll talk about low speed, high speed, and turns. Once again, you'll have an opportunity to practice these in flight as well. So the stalling speed of a particular aircraft is not going to be a fixed value. These are not going to be published. You don't pick up an aircraft manual and you say the aircraft, the AOA is going to be 16 or 17.2 degrees or anything like that. Some aircraft do have angle of attack indicators. It's not a requirement that aircraft do, but some do. And it could help you to identify, when you are potentially stalling. And also kind of comforting to know is we don't try to intentionally get into stalls. It's really just during training. Once you kind of leave the schoolhouse per se, you're not really going to be doing stalls until you go back to training, or maybe you're doing like a checkup flight for a flight review. Prior to actually reaching, a true stall, we have things called stall warning horns that are installed, and they're either pneumatic or they're electronic. And they give you a nice little buzzing sound or a little harmonica sound as you're approaching whatever that stall is. And it's a warning to the pilot to let you know, hey, if you continue whatever you're doing, you will stall the aircraft. And what we need to do is we need to reduce the critical angle of attack. So a lot of times to get out of a stall, we will, to reduce the critical angle of attack, we'll push the nose forward. We're going to apply power. It just depends on if we're in a low speed or a high speed here. So with the stalls, the low speed, just like your practice stalls, when you're coming into land, you're usually at very minimal power. And your angle of attack is going to have to be increased in order to really retain the lift for maintaining the altitude. Think of that analogy I told you about. You're at a stop sign at a complete stop and you need to make a turn. You got to put in more inputs, basically raising that nose even further because you're flying slower. And with this lower airspeed, you're going to have a greater angle of attack. And eventually, if you continue to slow down, you will stall the aircraft. A high speed could occur at any point in time if you dive an aircraft, or you might see these in your steep turns that you're going to do. If you were to pull up really, really abruptly in a turn, you will see that you do have the ability to stall the aircraft even at fast speeds such as 100 knots or faster. Okay? And this is because the angle of attack is going to change abruptly from pretty low, negligible, to something very high. It's going to exceed the critical angle of attack. You do not really do high speed, you don't really do these high speed stalls in the sense of what I just discussed with the steep turns. You do those in a commercial maneuver. You will have an opportunity to apply full power during your flight training, and you'll be at a little bit faster. You'll be at basically your rotation speed, about 50 or 60 knots. And even with the engine at 100% power, the instructor will demonstrate, and you'll eventually learn how to do this, that the airplane will still stall. Okay, so there's really only two stalls that you have to demonstrate. Once again, this class is not designed to teach you the step-by-step maneuvers. That's really the flight instruction phase. And the other one is going to be your turning. So this is centrifugal force. And anytime that we're basically in a turn, we'll talk about this as well. Anytime that you're actually in a 60-degree bank to the left or the right, you're actually pulling 2 times the amount of gravity. If you're pulling 2 times the amount of gravity, the wings have to support, and basically you need enough lift to support double the weight of whatever the aircraft weighs. So The centrifugal force is going to be added to the aircraft's weight, and the wing must produce sufficient additional lift to counterbalance the load imposed by the combination of centrifugal force and the weight of the aircraft. Okay. So let's take a look at this real quick here. I'm going to show you this video, and this is actually a diamond wing that we can see here. This individual basically taped a number of, these are just, yarns, or I guess you'd call it yarns. And what we're going to do is they're going to take us through a stall at different speeds. And really the speed is not, it's really just the camera speed. They're going to show you to you a little bit slower. Let's go ahead and take a look at this real quick and see if we can discuss it in real time. So very simply, when we are looking at this video, what you'll see, and it might be hard to tell, is the pilot is going to effectively start to pull back on the yoke, and the airplane is going to want to climb. Now this is an aircraft that has no issues. We can see all those nice little noodles perfectly going back with the smooth laminar airflow. Pay attention to the ones towards the end. The pilot's already starting to pitch up. The airflow is going to start to separate from the very, very end. There is the stall, right about there. They are pitching forward. They're gaining additional airspeed and probably applying power if necessary. The main thing is we want more air over those wings. We want to get that back. Okay, so that's really all a stall is. And doesn't mean you're going to fall out of the sky. We teach you ways of recovering from this. So once again, they're pulling up. They're basically going to exceed the critical angle of attack. We can see those noodles in the back. There's the stall, right? We lost that smooth laminar airflow, and the pilot recovers. They push the nose forward. They get additional air over those wings, basically increasing their airspeed. Here's it a little bit slower. There is the stall right about there. Sometimes it's hard to get these things to stall. And there's the recovery, right? We increase that airspeed over the wings. Okay, we're increasing our airspeed, which is in fact getting more velocity of air to go over that wing, and thus that's really what it looks like. Okay, and of course we don't always have strings on our airplane wings, but it's a good visual representation of what is actually happening when we stall an aircraft. Questions with that? Yep, and good point. Mike said, notice it stalls near the inside of the wing first, away from the ailerons. So training aircraft are designed like this. They're designed to stall from the inboard section. The stall starts in the inboard, and then it works its way outboard. And the reason why is it's protecting the ailerons. So in this case, this is a diamond. So a little bit harder to see, but the aileron is right about there from that section. And the whole idea behind this is that the stall starts on the inboard, and then it works on the outboard, starts to work its way out away from the aircraft. And what that does is it protects the ailerons so the pilot can still maintain some type of directional control, even though we don't really use ailerons for the recovery process. If you look at an airliner, it actually works in the opposite. It's designed, the V shape of most airline wings, or whatever you want to call it, horrible drawer, sorry guys. That kind of V shape, if you will, it's the opposite of general training aircraft in the sense that the stall actually occurs on the outboard, and then it works its way onto the inboard, to the actual fuselage. Okay, so this is a much, the one that I just drew on the screen here, where it starts on the inboard and works to its outboard. It's actually a little bit safer. On some aircraft, you might also have basically stall gates. You'll see these little pieces of metal in different locations, and that's trying to prevent the stall from going any further. Kind of delays the stall a little bit, gives the pilot a little bit more ability to recover in those types of circumstances. Okay, any questions with that? All right, the last thing I want to talk about, will be done, is going to be stability. So we talk about stability, there's really two different components to it, right? We have the maneuverability, which is going to be the quality of an aircraft that permits it to be maneuvered easily and to withstand the stresses that are imposed upon it. And then we have the controllability, which is what we can actually do. And it's really, how is the aircraft going to respond to any type of pilot inputs? I turn left, is this thing going to be nimble and agile and do what I want it to do or not? So those are really the two different signs of what we call stability. Now with stability, I'm going to show you dynamic stability. And there's a couple different types. We usually have something called static stability, and then we have dynamic stability. So within each one of these, Stability is the inherent ability of the airplane to actually return or not return to its original flight condition after something's happened to it. So for example, if in all three of these examples here, if the airplane was flying straight and level and then it started to experience turbulence and maybe you lost some altitude initially, does it get better and return back to straight and level flight? Does it, it doesn't really get better or worse, or does it get really bad? It starts to oscillate even further. So what we usually talk about is the first thing is the static response. What was the initial response to whatever this was, which is maybe, you weren't paying attention and you kicked your knee forward and you hit the control column and the aircraft responded. And then over time, we talk about what is known as dynamic. Okay? Dynamic is basically what is the response of the aircraft over a longer period of time. Most of your training aircraft out there are designed for what we see as positive dynamics. So if something happens, maybe you hit some turbulence, the aircraft starts to descend, you'll see that what we call is these oscillations right here are very minimal, and it's going to want to try to return back to its natural state. Neutral doesn't get better, doesn't get worse, just kind of, hanging out till you make some type of input. And then dynamic instability, you usually find these in like aerobatic aircraft, just things that just don't really want to comply. And what you'll see is maybe you hit a little bit of turbulence here, or maybe your knee hit that column, and what ends up happening is it's not too bad at first, but you'll see that these oscillations actually become larger and larger over time, and that is known as dynamic instability. This is all things that aircraft engineers and manufacturers put a lot of time and effort into. Your general aviation training aircraft, especially the most common ones out there, the Cessnas and the Pipers, for example, which are just because they have the largest numbers manufactured, they are designed for stability purposes, for this positive dynamic stability. If you don't really do anything over enough period of time, it's going to want to try to naturally recover. It also is harder to stall than some of the other aircraft. Like if you consider a Cirrus is pretty. It's not as tame, I guess, when you're doing a stall in a Cirrus compared to, let's say, a Cessna. Okay, so anytime that we have an airplane, an airplane that is going to be, more stable, right? The main thing that we usually look at when it comes to stability is going to be the fact that it might actually be a little bit more, in this case, like it's going to require less effort to control. So if we have something that has positive dynamic stability, then it will actually be more controllable, right? It requires less inputs from the pilot because it returns back to its natural state. Okay. All right, final FAA test question of the night, and then we'll call it. So I do have this. Hopefully, if you're listening, an airplane said to be inherently stable is it A, be difficult to stall, B, require less effort to control, or C, not spin? Got the first third of the class in so far. And about 50% of the way there. Thanks again for picking up the poll relatively quickly with this class. It makes our life a little bit easier. This is going to be our last question for tonight. After this, we are going to head on out, at least with this class. Just waiting for a few stragglers here. Got about 80% of the class in climbing at the moment. I will be able to stick around for just a few minutes to answer a couple questions if you have any, and of course if we're unable to get to all of your questions, or if the moderators weren't able to answer everything, use the Ask a CFI. The moderators and the tech team will stick around as well in the chat for a few minutes afterwards, and after we conclude this. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at it. We have about, and I apologize if I cut off anyone here, we've got about 30% of the class with A and 69% of the class with B and nobody on C. So pretty much the majority of the class has it correct. The correct answer is B. It is going to be inherently stable, which it means that it's going to require less effort to control. So for those that said A, it's going to be difficult to stall. Stability of an aircraft doesn't, it has an effect on its stall recovery, but it doesn't have an effect in terms of the difficulty of the stall entry. And no one said C, we don't need to discuss that. But essentially, if an airplane's more stable and you let go of the controls, you will not have to put in as many pilot inputs in there to get the airplane to remain, let's say, straight and level. So that's really what it's discussing. All right, so with that basically wraps up all the time that we had for today. We only got through about 80 to 85% of what I wanted to do. We still have some left-hand turning tendencies and a few other things to cover. Once again, if you want to give it a college attempt on the actual quiz for today, you're more than welcome to. If you want to hold off until Tuesday and give it a shot, you can also do that as well. What we'll do is we'll swing back and scooter back up with our East Coast class, same time. So that is 2 p.m. East Coast time or 5 p.m. Pacific time. And we'll see everybody back here on Tuesday. Thanks again. Huge shout out to all the moderators for all the help and the tech team, which will also be sticking around. If you have any questions, let me know. I think my chat paused there for a second. Let's see here. You're welcome, Tara. Let me just see if I can get through some of these here. Do we need the study materials or attending this class will be enough to pass the test? So the study materials, like the textbook that I mentioned, Rod Machado's book or equivalent, it's really good as a resource. And it's really, really helpful to kind of look back into. So, we cover the majority of everything you need to know, and we have handouts and other things that will supplement what we're also teaching you. Maybe it's kind of in a different voice or different format. So those things are always great. Kathy, Stephen, Bob, Steve, Janice, Gary, we'll see you all on Tuesday. Have a great night, everyone. Stay safe out there on the East Coast, too. I know there's a couple 100,000 people without power in very, very chilly conditions with ice and snow, so please stay safe out there. Titus, we'll see you later. Alfredo, adios. Gary as well. I think I already got you, sir. And any questions before I head out? Nelson, you're very welcome. And keep in mind, when we start on Tuesday, we don't have all the admin stuff, so we will kind of be jumping into it relatively quickly. Usually I do a couple of course updates if there are any at that point in time, and then we'll spend the majority of the day basically on the material that we needed to cover. So just a reminder, for this Tuesday, we're going to be finishing up the aerodynamics, not too much more, maybe like 20 or 30 minutes left. And then what will end up happening is we will pick up aircraft systems and flight instruments. I promise you we won't finish flight instruments. So flight instruments will bleed into Thursday's lesson. And then on Thursday, we'll finish up flight instruments for the week. And then we'll also start working on aviation charts, maps, and airspace. Hopefully get everyone caught up. Okay. Nathan, have a great one. Luther as well. Jordan. Corey, which class one will we use for the next live stream on Tuesday? So very simply, you guys are all in class number 1 right now. If you were to click on class number 1 a little bit later tonight, it will be this recording, and you want to basically go to lesson 2. So just keep kind of going down the row there. So lesson 2 is where the live stream will be located as well. Michelle, you're very welcome. And I apologize, I think the audio cut out a little bit and I wasn't paying attention. I'm not always eyes on the chat, just so we can get through the lesson. So I did see a little while back that the chat did cut out, or my voice came cut out for a little bit. The recording is recorded locally on the computer that I'm sitting in front of. So any type of issues like that, it actually doesn't translate into the recording as well. Okay. Thanks again, Drew. Do appreciate it. Abby, thanks again. I am looking, sir. Give me just 1 second. Any other questions? Senior Travis. All right. I will take a look at it in just 1 second, sir. All right. So with that, since there are really no other questions, I am going to go sign off. We'll leave the chat open for you to conclude any last minute questions you may or may not have with the rest of the team here. Great first class as well, and we'll see everybody back on Tuesday, same time, same place, but for lesson 2. One last question that I saw: do you recommend jumping into the IFR study guide test after passing the VFR? You absolutely can if you want to. Just make sure that you master the VFR materials. IFR is just a completely separate topic that builds off of the foundation for basically the VFR material. All right. With that, take care, everyone. I'll see everybody on Tuesday.